in the scorching heat of Dustwell Junction, where human dignity gets auctioned off like cattle, Cole Hartley witnessed something that would haunt him forever. A pregnant girl, barely 18, stood trembling on the auction block while her stepfather barked out bids like she was livestock. Emmy Rose didn't beg or cry, she just stood there with quiet defiance burning in her eyes. Cole Hartley wasn't a man who acted on impulse. The wealthy cattle baron had built his fortune through calculated decisions and cold pragmatism, but watching that girl's silent suffering awakened something in his dead heart. Without thinking, he stepped forward and bought her freedom with a single bid that silenced the crowd. What he thought was a simple act of mercy would become the most complicated decision of his life. But could a man haunted by his own ghosts truly save someone else from theirs? The ride back to the Hartley ranch passed in complete silence, save for the rhythmic clatter of wagon wheels against the sun-baked earth and the occasional snort from Cole's mare, Duchess. Emmy Rose sat rigid beside him on the worn leather seat, her hands folded tightly over her swollen belly, eyes fixed on the horizon, as if she could will herself to disappear into the shimmering heat waves. Cole stole glances at her determined set of her jaw, the way she held herself with dignity despite everything that had just transpired. Her dark hair, once probably well kept, now hung in tangled waves around her shoulders. The dress she wore had seen better days, patched and repatched, but clean. Someone had cared for her appearance once, before life had torn that luxury away. The Hartley estate sprawled across the valley like a small kingdom, thousands of acres of grazing land punctuated by natural springs and stands of cottonwood trees. The main house, built from local sandstone and weathered timber, rose from the landscape with quiet authority. It wasn't ostentatious. Cole had never been one for showing off, but it spoke of permanence, of a man who had put down roots and intended to stay. As they approached the circular drive, Emmy finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "How much did you pay for me?" Cole's hands tightened on the reins. The question hit him like a physical blow, not because he was ashamed of the amount, but because of what it represented. "That's not how I see it, but that's what happened." Her voice was steady. "Matt Vifect, my stepfather sold me, and you bought me. I need to know what I owe you." "You don't owe me anything." Emmy turned to look at him directly for the first time since leaving town. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray-green and turbulent. "Everything has a price, Mr. Hartley, everything." Cole brought the wagon to a stop in front of the wide porch that wrapped around the house like welcoming arms. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the wooden boards, and the wind chimes Sarah had hung years ago tinkled softly in the breeze. He'd meant to take them down after she died, but somehow never found the courage. "Maybe," he said, climbing down and offering her his hand, "but some things are worth more than money." Emmy hesitated before accepting his help, her fingers small and cold despite the heat. As her feet touched the ground, she swayed slightly, and Cole steadied her with a gentle hand on her elbow. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked, noting the pallor beneath her sun-touched skin. "I don't remember." The front door opened before they reached it, and Doc Mitchell emerged, his black bag in hand and concern etched deep in the lines of his weathered face. Thomas Mitchell had been tending to the people of Dustwell Junction for 30 years, and he'd delivered more babies, set more bones, and buried more friends than any man should have to. He was also one of the few people in town who'd never judged Cole for his isolation after Sarah's death. "Heard you caused quite a stir in town today," Doc said, his keen eyes taking in Emmy's condition with professional assessment. "This, the young lady, Emmy Rose," Cole said. "Emmy, this is Doc Mitchell, best physician within 100 miles. Emmy's grip on Cole's arm tightened. "I don't need a doctor. Every expectant mother needs a doctor," Doc said gently. "Especially one who's been through what I suspect you have. Why don't you let me take a look, just to make sure you and the baby are healthy?" The fear in Emmy's eyes was palpable. Cole could feel her trembling through the thin fabric of her dress. How many men had told her what she needed, what she had to do, what was best for her? How many times had her choices been stripped away in the name of someone else's idea of care? "It's your decision," Cole said quietly. "Whatever you choose, I'll respect it." Emmy searched his face, looking for the lie, the manipulation, the angle. When she didn't find it, some of the tension left her shoulders. "I suppose, if the doctor thinks it's necessary." Doc Mitchell smiled, the expression transforming his stern features. "I think it would be wise. Nothing invasive, just a general examination to make sure you're both doing well." The interior of the Hartley house spoke of a life interrupted. Everything was meticulously maintained, the hardwood floors gleamed, the furniture was dusted, the windows sparkled, but it felt like a museum, carefully preserved but no longer lived in. Family photographs lined the mantelpiece, and Emmy's eyes lingered on one in particular, a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, her hand resting on a very slight swell of belly. "That's Sarah," Cole said softly. "My wife. She's beautiful." She was. Cole's hand went unconsciously to his chest, where beneath his shirt, Sarah's wedding ring hung on a gold chain. He'd worn it there for 3 years, unable to take it off but unable to keep it on his finger. "She died giving birth to our son. He didn't make it either." Emmy's intake of breath was sharp. "I'm sorry, long time ago now." But Emmy heard the lie in his voice, saw the way his jaw tightened with old pain. Time didn't heal everything, no matter what people said. Some wounds just learned to live quietly in the dark corners of your heart. Doc Mitchell emerged from the guest room he'd been preparing, rolling up his sleeves. "All set, Emmy, whenever you're ready." As Emmy disappeared into the room with the doctor, Cole found himself alone in his own house for the first time in hours, but the silence felt different now, expectant, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Miguel Reyes appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hat in his hands. Miguel had worked the Hartley Ranch for 15 years, since he was barely more than a boy himself. He'd married his sweetheart, Rosa, in the little chapel in town, and they had 3 children now. Cole had been best man at the wedding, godfather to the eldest child. Miguel was more than an employee. He was family, one of the few people who'd stayed close after Sarah's death. "Patron," Miguel said carefully, "the men are talking. Let them talk. They're worried about you, about this." Miguel gestured toward the guest room. "Ben thinks maybe you're not thinking clearly." Ben Crawford was Cole's foreman, a gruff ex-cavalry sergeant who'd found his way to the ranch after the war. He was loyal to a fault, but he'd also appointed himself Cole's unofficial protector against what he saw as Cole's occasional lapses in judgment. "Ben thinks a lot of things," Cole said. "Doesn't make them true." "What are your intentions with the girl?" It was a fair question, and one Cole wasn't sure he could answer. What were his intentions? He'd acted on instinct in town, moved by something he couldn't name. Watching Emmy on that auction block had stirred feelings he'd thought were buried. "With Sarah to give a safe place to have her baby," he said finally, "to make sure she's cared for. And then it's up to her." Miguel studied his face for a long moment. "Rosa says if you need help with women's things, she's happy to come." The offer touched Cole more than he could express. Rosa was a good woman, practical and kind, and having another woman around might make Emmy more comfortable. "I'll ask her." The door to the guest room opened, and Doc Mitchell emerged, his expression thoughtful. Emmy followed, her color slightly better, but her movements still careful. "Well," Cole asked. "She's undernourished and exhausted, but the baby seems healthy. Due in about 6 weeks, I'd say." Doc's voice was gentle but firm. "She needs rest, good food, and no stress. Lots of women her age have babies with no complications, but given what she's been through, .. He didn't need to finish. They all understood the implications. "I can provide those things," Cole said. Doc nodded. "I'll check on her in a few days. In the meantime, beef broth, fresh vegetables, plenty of water. And Emmy," he turned to her with a kind smile, "you're not alone anymore. Cole Hartley may be many things, but he's a man of his word." After Doc left, Cole showed Emmy around the house, the kitchen with its large Castillon stove and well-stocked pantry, the library lined with books that Sarah had loved, the sitting room with its comfortable chairs arranged around the fireplace. Emmy said little, but he could see her taking in every detail, cataloging exits and hiding places with the instinctive wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust sanctuary. The guest room was at the far end of the hall from Cole's bedroom, with its own wash basin and a window that looked out over the gardens Sarah had planted. The bed was covered with one of Sarah's quilts, a wedding ring pattern in blues and whites that had taken her months to complete. "This is yours," Cole said, "for as long as you need it." Emmy ran her fingers over the quilt's intricate stitching. "It's beautiful work. Sarah made it the first year we were married. She said every home needed to be full of things made with love. She sounds like she was a wonderful person. She was..." Cole cleared his throat. "Are you hungry? I could fix something." Emmy's stomach chose that moment to growl audibly, and she blushed. I don't want to be any trouble. You're not trouble. In the kitchen, Cole moved with surprising grace for such a large man, laying out bread and cold meat, slicing cheese and tomatoes from the garden. Emmy perched on the edge of a chair at the kitchen table, watching his every move with cautious eyes. Miguel's wife, Rosa, makes the best tortillas in 3 counties, Cole said as he set the simple meal before her. I'll ask her to teach you, if you'd like. Emmy took a small bite, then another, larger one. You don't have to treat me like a guest. How should I treat you? The question seemed to confuse her. I don't know. This has never happened before. Cole poured himself coffee and sat across from her, careful to keep his movements slow and What do you mean? Someone being kind without wanting something in return. The simple statement hit Cole like a punch to the gut. What kind of life had this girl lived that basic human decency seemed foreign to her? Maybe that's because you've been around the wrong kind of people. Emmy finished eating in silence, and as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Cole lit the oil lamps around the house. The warm light created pockets of coziness in the large rooms, and for the first time since Sarah's death, the house didn't feel quite so empty. Mr. Hartley, Emmy said as he prepared to show her to her room. Cole, please, Cole, why did you buy me today, really? Cole was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. He could give her the easy explanation that it was the Christian thing to do, that no one deserved to be treated like property. But she deserved more honesty than that. Because when I looked at you on that platform, I saw someone who refused to break. Despite everything that had been done to you, you hadn't given up. That takes a kind of strength I admire. Emmy's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. I wanted to give up. Every day, I wanted to give up. But you didn't. That's what matters. As Emmy settled into the guest room, Cole retreated to his study, pouring himself a generous measure of whiskey and settling into the leather chair by the window. The ranch stretched out before him in the moonlight, peaceful and eternal. Somewhere out there, his cattle grazed contentedly, watched over by the men who'd become his second family. It was a good life, even if it was a lonely one. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, his house held the sound of another person moving about, getting ready for bed. Tonight, the silence wasn't quite so complete. Cole touched the chain around his neck, feeling the smooth gold of Sarah's ring beneath his shirt. I don't know what I'm doing, he whispered to her memory, but I couldn't just walk away. The wind chimes on the porch sang softly in the evening breeze, and Cole chose to believe it was Sarah's way of telling him that sometimes the heart knows what the mind cannot understand. The scream that tore through the early morning silence sent Cole bolting upright in bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. For a moment, caught between sleep and waking, he thought he was back in that terrible night 3 years ago when Sarah's cries had echoed through these same halls. But then reality crashed over him. Emmy. He found her collapsed on the floor of the guest room, doubled over in pain, her nightgown soaked with sweat. Her face was pale as moonlight, and when she looked up at him, her eyes were wide with terror. Something's wrong, she gasped. The baby Cole didn't hesitate. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how light she was, how fragile she felt against his chest. Hold on, he murmured, carrying her back to the bed. I'm getting Doc Mitchell. No, Emmy grabbed his shirt with surprising strength. Don't leave me alone, please. The desperation in her voice stopped him cold. Cole had seen fear before in wounded soldiers during the war, in cattle during a stampede, but this was something different. This was the fear of someone who'd been abandoned too many times to count. I won't leave you, he said, settling beside her on the bed. But I need to get help. Miguel appeared in the doorway, drawn by the commotion. His eyes took in the tsunami, pale and trembling, Cole's protective posture, and his expression grew grim. Get Doc Mitchell, Cole ordered. Fast as you can. Ride. Miguel nodded and disappeared. Cole could hear his boots pounding down the hallway. Then the front door slamming and hoofbeats receding into the dawn. Emmy's next contraction hit her like a physical blow, and she cried out, her fingers digging into Cole's arm. It's too early, she whispered when the pain passed. The baby's not supposed to come yet. Sometimes babies have their own timeline, Cole said, though his own worry was growing. 6 weeks early was dangerous, especially for a girl who'd been undernourished and stressed. Doc will be here soon. But even as he said it, Cole knew it would take Miguel at least an hour to reach town and return with the doctor. Emmy might not have an hour, Cole, Emmy's voice was small, frightened. I need to tell you something. Save your strength. No, you need to know. Another contraction gripped her, and she waited for it to pass before continuing. The baby's father. It wasn't willing. My stepfather, he owed money to a man in town, gambling debts. The man said he'd forgive the debt if. She didn't need to finish. Cole's hands clenched into fists, and for a moment, the rage that swept through him was so intense he could barely see straight. What's his name? It doesn't matter now. It matters to me. Emmy searched his face, seeing something there that made her shiver. Frank Briggs. He's the sheriff. The name hit Cole like a physical blow. Frank Briggs, the same man who'd stood by and watched Emmy's auction yesterday, who'd made no move to intervene when a pregnant girl was being sold like livestock. The same man who wore a badge and was supposed to protect people like Emmy. That's why no one helped you, Cole said, understanding flooding through him. Because he's the law. Emmy nodded, tears streaming down her face. There was nowhere to go, no one to tell. And my stepfather, he said if I caused trouble, he'd make sure I disappeared for good. Another contraction, stronger than the last, and Emmy's cry of pain echoed through the room. Cole had helped deliver cattle, had seen the miracle and mesigns of birth countless times, but this was different. This was Emmy, and suddenly the thought of losing losing them both was unbearable. Breathe, he said, taking her hand. In and out, slow and steady. I can't do this, Emmy sobbed. I'm not strong enough. Yes, you are. You're the strongest person I know. You don't know me. I know enough. I know you survived things that would break most people. I know you never gave up. Even when giving up would have been easier. I know you're going to get through this. Cole's words seemed to reach something deep inside Emmy, and she straightened slightly, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. Tell me about Sarah, she said between contractions. Tell me about when she was happy. The request surprised him, but Cole understood. Emmy needed something to hold on to, something beautiful to focus on instead of the pain. She loved mornings, Cole said, his voice soft with memory. She'd get up before dawn and sit on the porch with her coffee, watching the sun come up over the mountains. She said every sunrise was God's way of reminding us that every day was a gift. Emmy smiled through her pain. She sounds wonderful. She had this laugh like silver bells in the wind. And she sang while she worked. Old songs her grandmother taught her. Cole's hand found the chain around his neck, touching Sarah's ring through his shirt. She would have loved you, Emmy. She would have wanted to help you. How do you know? Because Sarah believed that everyone deserved a second chance. She used to say that life was too short to hold grudges, too precious to waste on anything but love. As if summoned by the mention of her name, a music box somewhere in the house began to play a gentle lullaby that drifted through the walls like a whisper from the past. Emmy's eyes widened. Where's that coming from? Cole's face went pale. Sarah's music box. It's in the parlor, but I haven't wound it in years. The melody continued, sweet and haunting, and Emmy felt some of her fear begin to ebb. Maybe she's here, she whispered. Maybe she's watching over us. Before Cole could respond, Emmy was gripped by another contraction, this one different from the others. Stronger, more purposeful. Something's happening, she gasped. Cole looked toward the door, praying to see Doc Mitchell's familiar figure, but the hallway remained empty. It was just the two of them, and Emmy's baby wasn't waiting for anyone. I think, Emmy's eyes went wide with realization. I think the baby's coming. Now. Time seemed to slow and accelerate simultaneously. Cole found himself moving on instinct, gathering clean towels and water, his hands steady despite the chaos in his mind. He'd delivered countless foals and calves, but this was different. This was Emmy and her baby, and suddenly everything in his world depended on the next few minutes. I can't, Emmy cried as another wave of pain crashed over her. I can't do this alone. You're not alone, Cole said firmly, taking his place beside her. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And then, as the sun crested the mountains and painted the room in shades of gold, Emmy Rose's daughter came into the world with a cry that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. She was small but perfect, her tiny fists waving in indignation at being thrust into the bright, noisy world. Cole wrapped the baby in one of Sarah's softest towels, his hands gentle and sure as he cleaned her tiny face. She's beautiful, Emmy. Perfect. Emmy reached for her daughter with trembling arms, and when the baby settled against her chest, the room filled with a peace that seemed almost sacred. The music box had stopped playing, but the silence that followed felt full rather than empty. "Hello, little one," Emmy whispered, her voice thick with tears. "I'm your mama." Cole watched the tableau, mother and child bathed in morning light, and felt something shift deep in his chest. This was what Sarah had wanted, what they'd dreamed of. During those brief, shining months when their own child had been growing, this was the sound of new life, of hope made flesh. Doc Mitchell arrived 20 minutes later, bursting through the door with his bag in hand and apologies on his lips, only to stop short at the sight before him. Emmy, radiant, despite her exhaustion, holding her daughter. Cole, sitting beside them with wonder written across his features, while Doc said softly, setting down his bag, "Looks like you managed just fine without me." He examined both mother and child with professional thoroughness, pronouncing them healthy despite the early arrival. "She's small but strong," he told Emmy. "Babies born to fighters usually are." As Doc packed up his instruments, he pulled Cole aside. "That was well done," he said quietly. "Not many men would have had the presence of mind to handle that situation so calmly. I couldn't let anything happen to them." Doc studied Cole's face, seeing something there that made him nod slowly. "No, I don't suppose you could. What are you going to name her?" he asked Emmy. Emmy looked down at her daughter, then up at Cole. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." Later, after Doc had left and Emmy had fallen into an exhausted sleep with Hope nestled beside her, Cole stood on his porch watching the sun climb higher into the desert sky. The events of the morning felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. But the evidence was there in the house behind him, the sound of a baby's soft breathing, the sight of Emmy's peaceful face, the knowledge that everything had changed. Miguel approached from the barn, his hat in his hands. "Patron, is everything all right? A baby girl?" Cole said. "Mother and child are both well." Miguel's weathered face broke into a grin. "Rosa will be so pleased. She's been worried." He paused, studying Cole's expression. "You look like a man who's seen a miracle." "Maybe I have." That afternoon, as Emmy slept and Hope dozed in the makeshift cradle Cole had fashioned from a dresser drawer, he found himself in the parlor standing before Sarah's music box. It was an intricate thing, carved from cherry wood with inlaid mother of pearl, a wedding gift from Sarah's grandmother. The mechanism was wound tight, though Cole was certain he hadn't touched it in years. He lifted the lid, and the familiar melody began to play, the same lullaby that had filled the house during Emmy's labor. As the notes danced through the air, Cole felt Sarah's presence more strongly than he had since the day she died. "I know what you're trying to tell me," he whispered to the empty room. "But I'm scared, Sarah. I'm scared of caring about them and losing them too." The music box played on, and Cole could almost hear Sarah's voice in the melody. Gentle but firm. "Love isn't about being safe, Cole. It's about being brave enough to try again." That evening, as the three of them sat in the kitchen, Emmy nursing Hope while Cole prepared a simple dinner, the peace of the moment was shattered by the sound of horses approaching. Cole looked out the window and felt his blood turn cold. Sheriff Frank Briggs sat astride his horse in the front yard, flanked by 2 deputies. Even from a distance, Cole could see the cruel satisfaction in the man's eyes. "Stay here," Cole told Emmy, but she was already pale with fear. "He's come for me," she whispered. "He's come to take Hope over my dead body." Cole stepped onto the porch, his hand resting casually on the butt of his revolver. "Sheriff Briggs, to what do I owe the pleasure?" Briggs dismounted, his boots heavy on the porch steps. He was a big man, thick through the middle, with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. "Heard you've been harboring a runaway. Hartley. Girl belongs to me." "The girl belongs to herself, and she's not running from anything. She's here by choice." "Choice?" Briggs laughed, a sound like gravel in a tin can. "Girl like that doesn't get to choose. She's got debts to pay, obligations to meet." "What kind of obligations?" Briggs' smile was predatory. "The kind that keep a man warm at night." The rage that had been simmering in Cole's chest all day finally boiled over. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward and drove his fist into Briggs' face, sending the sheriff stumbling backward. "You son of a," Briggs started, reaching for his gun. "I wouldn't," Cole said quietly, his own weapon already in his hand. The 2 deputies tensed, but neither drew their weapons. They'd heard the stories about Cole Hartley's war service, and they weren't eager to test his reputation. Briggs wiped blood from his split lip, his eyes murderous. This isn't over, Hartley. That girl and her bastard belong to me, and I mean to collect what's owed. The only thing you're owed is a bullet, Cole said, and if I see you on my property again, you'll get it. After the men rode away, Cole found Emmy in the kitchen, clutching Hope to her chest with tears streaming down her face. He'll be back, she said. He won't give up. Then we'll be ready for him. Cole looked at this brave, broken girl who'd brought life and hope back into his empty house and made a decision that would change everything. Emmy rose. Will you marry me? The question hung in the air between them, fragile and enormous. Emmy stared at him in shock. You don't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life. Marry me, and Briggs can't touch you. You'll be my wife, under my protection. Hope will be my daughter. But you don't love me. Cole was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer. I don't know what love is anymore, Emmy, but I know I'd rather die than see you hurt. I know that when I look at you and Hope, this house doesn't feel so empty, and I know that if you'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you're both safe and happy. Emmy looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms, then back at Cole's earnest face. What about Sarah? Sarah's gone. And maybe it's time I stopped living in the past and started building a future. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in shades of hope and promise, Emmy Rose gave Cole Hartley her answer, and somewhere in the house, Sarah's music box played one final, gentle note before falling silent forever. The wedding took place 3 days later in the parlor, with Doc Mitchell serving as witness and Miguel's family in attendance. Emmy wore a simple blue dress that Rosa had altered to fit her post-pregnancy figure, and Cole had traded his work clothes for the same black suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral. It wasn't a celebration born of love, but of necessity, a union, forged in the crucible of survival. Judge Harrison, a decent man who'd known Cole since before the war, asked no uncomfortable questions about the hasty ceremony. He'd heard the whispers around town about Cole's purchase of a pregnant girl, and while he didn't understand all the particulars, he trusted Cole's character enough to perform the service without judgment. Do you, Cole Michael Hartley, take Emmy Rose to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do you part? I do. Emmy's voice was barely a whisper when she repeated the vows, but her eyes never left Cole's face. Hope slept peacefully in Rosa's arms throughout the brief ceremony, as if sensing that this moment would define her future. When Judge Harrison pronounced them husband and wife, Cole leaned down and placed a gentle kiss on Emmy's forehead, chaste, respectful, but somehow more intimate than passion might have been. Mrs. Hartley, he said softly, and Emmy felt something shift inside her chest at the sound of her new name. The celebration that followed was modest but warm. Rosa had prepared a feast despite the short notice, and even Ben Crawford had cleaned up and joined them, his gruff exterior softening as he watched Hope sleep. Miguel proposed a toast to new beginnings, and for a few precious hours, the house felt like a home again. But reality intruded as the sun began to set. Judge Harrison pulled Cole aside as he prepared to leave. I hope you know what you're doing, son, the older man said. Briggs was in my office yesterday, asking about property laws and marriage rights. He's not giving up. What did you tell him? The truth, that a married woman is under her husband's protection, and her children belong to the family she's married into. But Frank Briggs has never been a man to let the law stand in his way when he wants something. Cole nodded grimly. I appreciate the warning. After the guests departed, Cole and Emmy found themselves alone for the first time as husband and wife. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions and uncertainties. I've prepared the guest room next to yours for Hope, Cole said finally. Rosa brought over a proper cradle and some baby things. That's very kind, Emmy. Cole turned to face her, his expression serious. I want you to understand something. This marriage, it's legal, it's binding, and it gives you all the protections that come with being my wife. But I don't expect anything from you that you're not ready to give. Emmy looked confused. I don't understand. Your room is yours. Your privacy is yours. I won't press you for anything intimate until and unless you want it. This is a marriage of protection, not possession. The relief that flooded Emmy's face was unmistakable, followed quickly by something else, gratitude, and perhaps the first stirrings of genuine affection. Thank you, she whispered. I wasn't sure how to ask. You don't have to ask. It's freely given. The next morning brought its own challenges. Cole woke before dawn, as was his habit, and found Emmy already in the kitchen, attempting to prepare breakfast with Hope strapped to her chest in a makeshift sling Rosa had shown her how to fashion. "You don't have to do that," Cole said, taking the spatula from her hands. "You just had a baby 3 days ago. You should be resting. I need to earn my keep. You're my wife, not my employee." Emmy watched as Cole moved efficiently around the kitchen, scrambling eggs and frying bacon with practiced ease. "Where did you learn to cook?" "The war," Cole said. "Man learns to fend for himself when he's spending months in the field with nothing but hardtack and whatever game he can catch." "You were a soldier, Colonel?" "Actually, cavalry." Cole's voice carried the weight of old memories. "Spent 4 years riding through hell, trying to keep good men alive." "Is that where you learned to deliver babies too?" Cole smiled at that, one of the first genuine smiles Emmy had seen from him. "No, that was here on the ranch. When you're responsible for livestock, you learn to help with births, though I'll admit, yesterday was considerably more nerve-wracking than delivering a calf." As they ate breakfast together, Hope began to fuss, and Emmy excused herself to feed the baby. When she returned, she found Cole at his desk in the study, sorting through papers with a frown creasing his brow. "Problems?" she asked. Cole looked up, startled. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Emmy had caught a glimpse of the paper notices, letters with official seals, financial troubles. "The ranch has been challenging lately. Drought last summer killed a lot of the grass, and cattle prices have been down, but we'll manage." Emmy studied his face, noting the tension around his eyes, the way his jaw tightened when he thought she wasn't looking. "How bad is it, Emmy? I'm your wife now, even if it's just on paper. Don't I have a right to know if we're in danger of losing our home?" Cole was quiet for a long moment, then set down his pen. "Bad enough that I might have to sell some of the land, maybe a lot of it." "To who?" "Marcus Steele's been sniffing around. He's got plans for development, wants to bring the railroad through here." Emmy had heard whispers about Marcus Steele, in town, a wealthy businessman from Bach East, who'd been buying up struggling ranches all through the territory. "And you don't want to sell?" "This land has been in my family for 2 generations. My father built this ranch from nothing, and I expanded it. Sarah and I were going to—" He stopped, old pain flickering across his features. "We're going to what?" "Build something to pass on to our children, a legacy." Emmy looked around the study, taking in the maps on the walls, the ledgers full of Cole's careful handwriting, the photographs of prize bulls and champion horses. This wasn't just a business to him, it was his identity, his connection to the past, and his hope for the future. "There has to be another way," she said. "I've explored every option. The bank won't extend my loan, and I don't have any other assets to leverage." That afternoon, while Cole was out checking the cattle with Miguel, Emmy found herself drawn to the hidden compartment Ben had mentioned was behind one of the study's bookshelves. She wasn't snooping, exactly, just trying to understand the man she'd married and the life she'd stepped into. The compartment was easy enough to find once she knew what to look for, and inside was exactly what Ben had described: a Colt .45 revolver, well maintained and clearly functional. But there was something else: a wooden box filled with military commendations, letters of recommendation, and a photograph of Cole in his army uniform, standing with a group of other officers. She was studying the photograph when Cole's voice from the doorway made her jump. "Find what you were looking for." Emmy spun around, the photograph still in her hands, cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I wasn't tied, didn't mean to pry." "But you did anyway." Emmy set the photograph back in the box carefully. "Ben mentioned the gun. I was curious." Cole moved into the room, his expression unreadable. "Curious about what kind of man you married?" "Something like that." Cole picked up the photograph, his thumb tracing over the faces of long-dead friends. "That was taken at Fort Davis, Texas, 1863. Half those men didn't make it home. But you did." "I did." He set the photograph aside and picked up the revolver, checking it automatically even though he knew it was unloaded. "Some days I wonder if I should have." The admission hung between them, raw and painful. Emmy had heard that tone before in her own voice, during the darkest moments of her captivity. "I used to think the same thing," she said quietly. "Every night for months, I'd pray that I just wouldn't wake up the next morning." Cole looked at her with new understanding. "What changed?" Emmy's hand went instinctively to Hope, sleeping peacefully in her basket nearby. "The first time I felt her move inside me, I realized I wasn't just fighting for my own life anymore. And now, Emmy considered the question seriously. Now, I think maybe we both deserve a chance to find out what life can be like when we're not just surviving. That evening, as they sat together in the parlor after supper, Emmy brought up the subject that had been weighing on her mind all day. The money troubles, she began carefully. Emmy, I told you not to worry about that, but I am worried. This is my home now too, and hopes, if there's a way I can help. Cole shook his head. You're a new mother. You need to focus on recovering and taking care of Hope. I'm stronger than I look. I know you are. But strength isn't always about doing everything yourself. Sometimes it's about letting others help you. Emmy smiled at that. Funny advice, coming from a man who's trying to solve all his problems alone. The observation hit home, and Cole had the grace to look sheepish. Point taken. So what can I do? Cole was quiet for a moment, considering. Rosa mentioned that you used to sew. She said your dress, before it got so worn, was beautifully made. My mother taught me it was one of the few things my stepfather never tried to sell. There might be work in town. Ladies needing alterations, mending, that sort of thing. It wouldn't be much, but every little bit helps. Emmy nodded thoughtfully. I'd like that. I'd like to contribute something. As they prepared for bed that night, going through the awkward dance of new spouses who were still essentially strangers, Emmy paused outside her bedroom door. Cole, yes, thank you for everything, for saving me, for marrying me, for giving Hope a name and a future. I know this isn't what you planned for your life. Cole studied her face in the lamplight, the delicate features marked by hardship, but not broken by it. The eyes that held depths of strength and sorrow he was only beginning to understand. Maybe what we plan and what we need aren't always the same thing, he said finally. Emmy smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since that day at the auction. Maybe not. Later, lying alone in his bed with Sarah's ring still hanging around his neck, Cole listened to the sounds of the house settling around him. But tonight, the silence wasn't empty. Tonight, he could hear the soft murmur of Emmy humming to Hope in the next room, and the sound filled spaces in his heart he'd thought were permanently closed. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and the wind rattled the windows. But inside the Hartley house, three people who'd never expected to be a family were learning to live together. One careful day at a time. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Marcus Steele arrived in a gleaming black carriage, dressed in an expensive Eastern suit that looked absurdly out of place against the rough backdrop of the ranch. He was a handsome man in his 40s, with silver-touched hair, and the kind of smooth confidence that came from never having to worry about money. Mr. Hartley, Steele said, dismounting with practiced ease. I heard congratulations are in order. A new wife and child, I'm told. Cole stepped onto the porch, positioning himself between Steele and the house. What do you want, Steele? The same thing I've always wanted. To make you a very wealthy man. Steele's smile was all teeth and no warmth. Though I understand your circumstances have become somewhat more pressing lately. My circumstances are none of your business. On the contrary, they're very much my business when they involve property I'm interested in acquiring. Steele pulled a folded document from his jacket. I've had my lawyers draw up a new offer. Very generous, considering the current market conditions. Cole didn't take the paper. Not interested. Perhaps you should look at the numbers before you decide. I think you'll find them quite motivating. Despite himself, Cole glanced at the document. The amount written there was substantial enough to pay off all his debts and leave him with a comfortable nest egg, enough to give Emmy and Hope security for the rest of their lives. Think about it, Steele said, tucking the paper into Cole's shirt pocket. Think about what's best for your new family. I'll be in town for another week. After Steele left, Cole stood on his porch for a long time, staring out at the land his grandfather had claimed, his father had developed, and he had loved. The paper in his pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Emmy appeared beside him, Hope in her arms, and followed his gaze across the rolling pastures. Beautiful land, she said quietly. Yes, it is. Worth fighting for. Cole looked down at her, this brave woman who'd already lost so much, who was still willing to fight for a future that was far from certain. I used to think so, he said. Now, I'm not sure what's worth fighting for anymore. Emmy shifted Hope to one arm and took Cole's hand with the other. Her fingers were small and soft, but her grip was firm. Maybe, she said, It's not about the land. Maybe it's about the people on it. 3 weeks into their marriage, Emmy began her first quilt. She started it in the early morning hours when Hope was sleeping peacefully and Cole was out tending to the cattle. The fabric came from scraps Rosa had collected over the years, pieces of old dresses, remnants from curtains, bits of cloth that had once been part of other lives, other stories. Emmy spread them across the kitchen table, sorting colors and patterns with the careful eye of someone who understood that beauty could be born from broken things. "What are you making?" Cole asked when he found her there, her fingers moving with practiced precision as she cut and measured. "A quilt for Hope's bed," Emmy replied, not looking up from her work. "Every baby should have something made just for her." Cole picked up one of the fabric squares, a piece of soft yellow cotton with tiny roses embroidered along the edge. "This is beautiful work. It was my mother's dress, the only thing of hers I managed to keep." Emmy's voice was soft with memory. She used to say that a quilt was like a family, all the different pieces coming together to make something stronger than any of them could be alone. Cole studied Emmy's face as she worked, noting the peace that seemed to settle over her when her hands were busy. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman. She died when I was 12, and that's when everything changed." Emmy sat down, her scissors, and looked directly at Cole. "My stepfather wasn't always ... what he became. When my mother was alive, he tried to be a good man. But grief does strange things to people. That's no excuse for what he did to you." "No," Emmy agreed. "But understanding doesn't have to mean forgiveness. My mother taught me that too." As the days passed, the quilt began to take shape, a pattern called wedding ring that seemed particularly fitting for their unusual circumstances. Emmy worked on it during quiet moments throughout the day, and Cole found himself watching her progress with an interest that surprised him. There was something meditative about the process, something hopeful about creating beauty, one small piece at a time. Their domestic routine settled into a comfortable rhythm. Cole woke before dawn to tend to the ranch, while Emmy managed the house and cared for Hope. They shared meals and conversation, gradually learning the small details that made up each other's lives. Emmy discovered that Cole liked his coffee strong and black, that he read poetry when he thought no one was looking, and that he had a gift for making Hope laugh with silly faces and gentle tickling. Cole learned that Emmy hummed when she was content, that she had an encyclopedic knowledge of wildflowers and their medicinal properties, and that she slept with one hand always touching Hope's cradle, as if she needed the constant reassurance that her daughter was safe. "I've been thinking about your suggestion," Cole said one evening, as they sat in the parlor after supper, "about the sewing work in town." Emmy looked up from her quilt, needle poised mid-stitch. "And Mrs. Patterson runs the general store. She mentioned that she's been getting requests for a seamstress, ladies wanting alterations, repairs, that sort of thing. If you're still interested, I could speak to her." "I'd like that very much." The next day, Cole drove Emmy and Hope into town for the first time since their wedding. Emmy wore her best dress, the blue one Rosa had altered, and carried a small bag containing samples of her needlework. As they rode down the main street, Emmy could feel the stares and whispers of the townspeople, but she kept her chin up and her eyes forward. Mrs. Patterson turned out to be a kindly woman in her 60s, with silver hair and gentle eyes. She examined Emmy's samples with the critical eye of someone who knew quality workmanship when she saw it. "This is lovely work, dear," she said, running her fingers over a delicate piece of embroidery. "Very fine indeed. When could you start?" "Whenever you need me. I have 3 dresses that need hemming, and a coat that needs the sleeves shortened. Could you have them done by the end of the week?" "Certainly." As Mrs. Patterson gathered the garments, she lowered her voice and leaned closer to Emmy. "I want you to know, dear, that there are plenty of us in town who think what Cole did was exactly right. Don't let the gossips get to you." Emmy felt a warm flush of gratitude. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That means more than you know." On the way home, Cole stopped at the bank to discuss his loan situation. Emmy waited in the wagon with Hope, trying not to listen to the harsh voices coming from inside the building. When Cole emerged 20 minutes later, his face was grim. "No luck?" Emmy asked quietly. "They're demanding payment in full within 60 days, or they'll begin foreclosure proceedings." Emmy's heart sank. The sewing work would help, but it wouldn't be nearly enough to save the ranch. "What about Steele's offer?" "I won't sell to that man. He's planning to strip mine the land, destroy everything my family built. Then we'll find another way." Cole looked at her with something approaching wonder. "You say, we like this, is your fight too?" isn't it? This is Hope's inheritance now, her future. Of course it's my fight. That evening, as Emmy worked on her quilt and Cole reviewed the ranch's books for the 100th time, they were interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Cole immediately tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun cabinet. "Stay inside," he told Emmy, but she followed him to the window. 3 riders approached the house. But these weren't the threatening figures Cole had been expecting. Instead, it was Judge Harrison, accompanied by a man Emmy didn't recognize, and Doc Mitchell. "Evening, Cole," Judge Harrison called out. "Mind if we come up? Got something important to discuss?" Cole stepped onto the porch. Emmy closed behind him, with Hope in her arms. "Judge, Doc, what brings you out here so late?" The third man stepped forward, a tall, lean fellow with intelligent eyes and ink-stained fingers. "I'm William Harper, from the Territorial Capital. I represent a consortium of investors who are very interested in your ranch, Mr. Hartley." Cole's expression hardened. "If you're working with Marcus Steele, quite the opposite, actually," Harper interrupted. "We're working against him. May we come inside? This is rather complex to explain." In the parlor, Harper spread out maps and documents on the coffee table, while Doc Mitchell cooed over baby Hope. "The territorial government has been concerned about Mr. Steele's activities for some time," Harper began. "His mining operations in other areas have been environmentally destructive, to put it mildly." "What does this have to do with us?" Emmy asked. "Your ranch sits on what our surveys indicate is one of the largest natural aquifers in the territory. Fresh water, Mrs. Hartley, and lots of it. If Steele gets his hands on this land and begins his mining operations, he'll contaminate the water supply for hundreds of miles." Cole leaned forward, interested despite himself. "So what are you proposing? A conservation easement? You keep your ranch, continue operating it as you always have, but you sell the development rights to the territorial government. We pay you enough to clear your debts and provide a comfortable living, and the land is protected in perpetuity." Emmy felt her heart leap with hope, but Cole's expression remained skeptical. "How much are we talking about?" Harper named a figure that made Emmy gasp. It was less than Steele's offer, but more than enough to save the ranch and provide security for their family. "There's one catch," Judge Harrison added. "The territorial legislature needs to approve the funding, and that won't happen for another 2 months. Can you hold on that long?" Cole ran his hands through his hair, weighing their options. "The bank wants payment in 60 days. I might be able to help with that," Doc Mitchell spoke up quietly. "I've got some savings put aside, and I believe in what you're doing here. Consider it a bridge loan until the territorial money comes through." The generosity of the offer left Cole speechless. These men, friends and neighbors, were willing to risk their own resources to help him save his family's legacy. "Why?" Cole asked finally. "Why would you do this for me?" Judge Harrison smiled. "Because this community has watched you grieve for 3 years, and now we're watching you come back to life. Emmy and Hope. They've been good for you. Cole, you're becoming the man we all knew you could be again." Emmy felt tears prick her eyes at the judge's words. She looked at Cole, seeing the emotion he was trying so hard to contain. "I need time to think about this," Cole said. "Of course, but don't take too long. Steele's not going to wait forever, and neither will the bank." After the men left, Cole and Emmy sat in silence for a long time, Hope sleeping peacefully between them on the sofa. "It's a good offer," Emmy said finally. "It's charity, it's friendship, and sometimes accepting help is just as brave as offering it." Cole picked up a piece of Emmy's quilt, running his thumb over the careful stitches. "You really think this could work? All of us, trying to build something together." Emmy looked around the room at the photographs of Cole's family, at Sarah's music box on the mantelpiece, at the cradle where Hope slept peacefully, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The sensation of being home. "My mother used to say that the strongest quilts were made from the most unlikely pieces," she said. "Things that didn't seem like they'd go together, but somehow created something beautiful when they were stitched with love." Cole set down the fabric and looked at Emmy, really looked at her, seeing not the frightened girl he'd bought at auction, but the strong, wise woman she was becoming in the safety of his home. "Emmy," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. What? When I married you, I thought I was doing you a favor, protecting you from Briggs, giving Hope a name, but I'm starting to realize that maybe you saved me too." Emmy felt her breath catch. "Cole. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he said quickly. I just wanted you to know that this, whatever this is between us, it's not just about protection anymore, at least not for me. Emmy studied his face, seeing the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide. She thought about the man who'd bought her freedom without asking for anything in return, who'd helped deliver her baby with gentle hands, who'd married her to keep her safe from a monster wearing a badge. For me either, she whispered. The admission hung between them, fragile and precious. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending tumbleweeds dancing across the yard. But inside the house, two people who'd found each other in the darkest of circumstances were discovering that sometimes love grew not from passion or romance, but from the quiet recognition of kindred souls. Cole reached out slowly, giving Emmy every chance to pull away, and touched her cheek with his fingertips. She leaned into the caress, closing her eyes and allowing herself, for the first time in her life, to feel truly safe in a man's touch. "We'll make this work," Cole said, his voice rough with emotion. "The ranch, the family, all of it. We'll make it work." Emmy opened her eyes and smiled, the kind of smile that started in the heart and worked its way outward, transforming her entire face. "Yes," she said, "we will." Later that night, as Emmy put the finishing touches on another section of Hope's quilt, she thought about patterns and purposes, about the way seemingly random pieces could come together to create something stronger and more beautiful than anyone might have imagined. Tomorrow, Cole would give Harper his answer. Tomorrow, they would begin the fight to save not just the ranch, but the future they were slowly building together. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of their home, three people who had never expected to be a family were learning that love could grow in the most unlikely soil, and that sometimes the most beautiful things in life were born from the courage to start over. The burned letter came to light on a Tuesday morning when Emmy was cleaning out the small trunk that held her few possessions. She'd been putting off the task for weeks, unable to bring herself to face the meager remnants of her old life, but with their future looking brighter, she felt ready to finally sort through the past. Most of the trunk's contents were predictably a few items of clothing to worn to mend, a small Bible with her mother's name inscribed in fading ink, locket that had long since lost its chain. But at the bottom, wrapped in a piece of oiled cloth, was something Emmy had forgotten existed, a letter, half destroyed by fire, with her mother's delicate handwriting still visible on the unburned portions. Emmy's hands trembled as she unfolded the fragile paper. The letter was dated just weeks before her mother's death, addressed to someone named Dearest Margaret in another town. Most of the middle was gone, consumed by flames, but enough remained to make Emmy's blood run cold. The documents are safely hidden in the bank vault in Denver. Should anything happen to me, Emmy must know about her inheritance. Nearly $50,000, plus the shares in the mining concern. I fear Richard suspects something. The letter fell from Emmy's nerveless fingers. $50,000, a fortune by any measure, especially out here in the territories. Her mother had been wealthy enough to secure Emmy's future forever, and somehow, her stepfather had known. Emmy Cole's voice from the kitchen made her jump. "Everything all right?" She gathered the letter carefully, her mind racing. This changed everything. If her mother had left her that much money, and if the documents were in Denver, as the letter suggested, then her stepfather's desperate attempts to control her made terrible sense. He hadn't just been trying to pay off his gambling debts, he'd been trying to get his hands on a fortune. "Emmy," Cole appeared in the doorway, concern creasing his features. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "In a way, I have." Emmy held out the letter with shaking hands. "You need to read this." Cole took the fragile paper, his expression growing increasingly grave as he read the visible portions. When he finished, he looked up at Emmy with a mixture of amazement and worry. $50,000, he said quietly. "My mother was rich, and I never knew it. She lived so simply, never spoke of money or investments." Emmy sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. "My stepfather knew. He had to have known. That's why he was so desperate to keep control of you, not just for Briggs' gambling debt, but for this." Cole sat beside her, still studying the letter. "Emmy, if this is real, if that money is still there, it could save the ranch without any help from the territorial government. It could do more than that. It could give you complete independence." The way Cole said it made Emmy look at him sharply. There was something in his voice, a resignation that she didn't like. "What do you mean?" Cole was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I mean that with that kind of money, You wouldn't need me anymore. You could go anywhere, do anything. You could have the life you deserve. Emmy stared at him, seeing the walls going back up around his heart. You think I'd leave? I think you'd be foolish not to consider it. The suggestion hit Emmy like a physical blow. After everything they'd shared, everything they'd built together, did Cole really think she would abandon him at the first opportunity? Is that what you want? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For me to go? I want what's best for you, and hope. That's not what I asked. Cole stood and walked to the window, his back rigid with tension. What I want isn't important. It is to me. The admission hung between them, heavy with unspoken emotion. Emmy rose and moved to stand behind Cole, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Cole, look at me. He turned slowly, and Emmy saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear she'd seen the night Hope was born, the terror of caring too much and losing everything again. I'm not Sarah, Emmy said gently. I'm not going to leave you. You don't know that. People leave, Emmy. People die. People find better lives and move on. Some people do. But I'm not some people. Emmy stepped closer until she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. I'm your wife. Hope is your daughter. This is our home. Do you really think I'd throw all of that away for money? Cole's resistance crumbled slightly. The money would give you choices. I already made my choice. I chose you. I chose this life. I chose us. Money doesn't change that. But even as Emmy spoke the words, she could see that Cole wasn't entirely convinced. The inheritance revelation had shaken something fundamental in him, brought back all his fears about being left behind. That afternoon, while Cole was out with Miguel checking the water pumps, Emmy found herself in his study, staring at the maps on the walls and the ledgers, full of careful calculations. She understood now why he was so afraid. In his mind, she was already gone, already planning her escape to a life of wealth and comfort, far from the dusty challenges of ranch living. She was still there when he returned, sitting in his chair and studying the financial documents scattered across his desk. Learning the cattle business, he asked, attempting lightness but not quite achieving it. Learning about my husband's life, Emmy replied. About the dreams he's been fighting to save. Cole moved to the window, keeping distance between them. Emmy, about this morning. We need to go to Denver. The statement stopped Cole mid-sentence. What? The bank vault where my mother hid the documents. We need to go there and find out exactly what she left me. Emmy stood, moving to stand beside Cole at the window. But we go together. As husband and wife. Emmy, no. Listen to me. You're so afraid I'm going to leave that you're already pushing me away. But I'm not going anywhere without you. If there's money in Denver, we'll bring it back here and use it to secure our future. Together. Cole studied her face, looking for the lie, the doubt, the eventual departure. When he didn't find it, some of the tension left his shoulders. It's a hard trip to Denver, 2 weeks by wagon, and that's if the weather holds. I'm stronger than I look and hope. Hope needs her father as much as she needs her mother. We're a family, Cole. We make decisions together. That evening, as they planned the journey over supper, Emmy noticed Cole watching her with something approaching wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe she was real, that she was choosing to stay. There's something else, Emmy said as they cleared the dishes. Something I've been thinking about. What's that? The quilt I'm making for Hope. I want to add something to it. A piece from one of Sarah's dresses. Cole's hands stilled on the plate he was drying. Emmy, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Sarah was part of this family, part of this house. She should be part of Hope's quilt, too. Emmy turned to face him fully. I'm not trying to replace her, Cole. I could never do that, but I can honor her memory and make sure Hope knows about the woman who loved her father first. The generosity of the gesture left Cole speechless. Most women would have been jealous of a dead wife's memory, would have wanted to erase all traces of the previous life, but Emmy was offering to weave Sarah into their future, to make her part of the story they were telling together. You're remarkable, Cole said finally. Do you know that? Emmy smiled, the kind of smile that lit up her entire face. I'm learning to be. You make me want to be remarkable. They found Sarah's wedding dress the next morning, carefully preserved in a cedar chest in the spare bedroom. It was a beautiful gown, made of ivory silk with delicate pearl buttons and lace that had been hand-tatted by Sarah's grandmother. Even after 3 years, it still carried the faint scent of the lavender sachets Sarah had loved. Emmy handled the dress with reverent care, running her fingers over the intricate beadwork and fine stitching. She had exquisite taste. She would have liked you, Cole said softly. She would have said you have good eyes and a generous heart. Emmy carefully cut a small square from the dress's inner hem, where it wouldn't be missed if someone wanted to display the gown someday. The silk felt like liquid in her hands, and she could almost feel the love that had gone into every stitch. I'll put it in the center of the quilt, she said. The heart of the pattern, where everything else radiates. From that way, Hope will always know that love was the foundation of her family, even before she was born. That night, as they prepared for bed, Cole paused outside Emmy's door. In the weeks since their marriage, they'd maintained careful boundaries, respecting each other's space and privacy. But something had shifted between them today. Some barrier had come down. Emmy, she turned, still in her simple cotton nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. In the lamplight, she looked young and beautiful and infinitely precious. Yes, when we get back from Denver, whatever we find there, would you consider moving into my room, as my wife, not just in name? The question hung between them, vulnerable and hopeful. Emmy felt her heart flutter with something that wasn't quite fear but wasn't quite excitement either. Are you asking because you think the money will change things between us? I'm asking because I love you. The words fell into the silence between them like stones dropped into still water, sending ripples through everything they'd built together. Emmy felt her breath catch, felt tears prick her eyes. You love me. I love you, Cole repeated, his voice stronger now. I love your strength and your gentleness. I love the way you hum when you're working and the way you make Hope laugh. I love that you see beauty in broken things and that you're brave enough to start over. I love you, Emmy, and I want to be your husband in every way that matters. Emmy stepped closer, close enough to see the vulnerability in his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly at his sides. I love you too, she whispered. I have 4 weeks now, but I was afraid to say it. Afraid of what? Afraid that you'd think it was gratitude instead of love. Afraid that you'd think I was trying to replace Sarah. Emmy reached up and touched his cheek with gentle fingers. But this isn't about replacing anyone. This is about choosing each other, choosing this life we're building together. Cole leaned into her touch, closing his eyes and letting himself believe, finally and completely, that this remarkable woman was his. When we get back from Denver, Emmy said softly, ask me again. I will. As Emmy closed her bedroom door behind her, she thought about journeys and destinations, about the difference between running away and moving toward something better. Tomorrow, they would begin the trip to Denver to uncover the secrets her mother had hidden, but tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, home with the man she loved and the daughter they were raising together. The inheritance money, if it existed, would be a blessing, but it wouldn't define their future. They would do that themselves, one choice at a time, one day at a time, stitching their lives together with the same careful love Emmy put into every quilt square. Outside, the wind sang through the cottonwood trees, and somewhere in the distance, a night bird called to its mate. In the house, 3 people who had found each other against all odds were preparing to fight for the future they'd chosen together. The journey to Ottender should have taken 2 weeks. It took 3, thanks to an early autumn storm that turned the mountain passes into treacherous rivers of mud and forced them to take shelter in a tiny settlement called Pine Ridge for 4 days while the weather cleared. Cole had been reluctant to bring Hope on such a difficult journey, but Emmy had insisted they travel as a family. She'd fashioned a comfortable nest in the back of the wagon, surrounded by quilts and supplies, where Hope could sleep safely while they traveled. The baby seemed to thrive on the adventure, gurgling happily at the changing scenery and sleeping peacefully through the worst of the road conditions. Denver, when they finally reached it, was a revelation to Emmy. She'd spent her entire life in small frontier towns where everyone knew everyone else's business. The city, with its bustling streets and grand buildings, felt like another world entirely. Cole navigated the chaos with practiced ease, having visited on business several times over the years. The Colorado First National Bank stood on a corner downtown, an imposing structure of red brick and carved stone that spoke of permanence and prosperity. Emmy felt intimidated just looking at it, but Cole took her arm reassuringly as they climbed the front steps. Remember, he murmured, you're Mrs. Cole Hartley now. You belong here as much as anyone else. The bank manager, a thin man named Fitzgerald with wire-rimmed spectacles and careful manners, examined Emmy's identification documents and the burned letter with professional skepticism. Mrs. Hartley, he said finally, I'm afraid I'll need more than a partially destroyed letter to access any safety deposit boxes registered under your maiden name. Emmy felt her heart sink, but Cole stepped forward. What exactly would you need? Birth certificate, marriage certificate, some form of legal documentation proving Mrs. Hartley's identity and her relationship to the account holder. I have my birth certificate, Emmy said, pulling the carefully preserved document from her reticule, and here's our marriage certificate. Fitzgerald examined both documents, comparing the signatures and official seals. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded slowly. These appear to be in order. However, I'm still not certain we have any accounts registered under the name Rose Sullivan. Emmy's maiden name had been Rose, not Sullivan, another lie her stepfather had told her about her own identity. But as they were preparing to leave in disappointment, an elderly clerk who'd been listening to their conversation approached hesitantly. Excuse me, he said quietly, but did you say Rose Sullivan? About 20 years ago? Yes, Emmy replied hopefully. I remembered that account. Beautiful woman, came in just before she died, said she was updating her will and wanted to make sure her daughter would be provided for. The clerk's eyes lit up with recognition. She was very specific about the identification requirements, said her daughter might not know her real name when she came looking. Emmy felt the world tilt slightly. Her real name? What else had her mother kept hidden? The clerk led them to a secure room in the basement of the bank, where rows of safety deposit boxes lined the walls like metal filing cabinets. Box 247 was larger than Emmy had expected, requiring 2 keys to open, one held by the bank, another that the clerk retrieved from a special vault. Inside were documents that would change everything. That the first was a birth certificate, real birth certificate, showing her name as Emmy Margaret Rose Sullivan Brennan, her mother's maiden name, which meant Emmy's father hadn't been the man she'd always believed. My God, Cole breathed, reading over her shoulder. Emmy, look at this. The next document was a marriage certificate, her mother's first marriage, to a man named Patrick Brennan, dated 5 years before Emmy's birth. Below that was a death certificate for the same man, killed in a mining accident when Emmy was barely 2 years old. My father, Emmy whispered. My real father. But the revelations weren't finished. At the bottom of the box was a bank book showing deposits and interest payments over nearly 20 years. The final balance made Emmy's knees go weak. $73,000. More money than she'd ever imagined existed in one place. Beneath the bank book was a letter in her mother's careful handwriting, addressed simply to my dearest Emmy. With trembling hands, Emmy unfolded the pages and began to read aloud. My darling daughter, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have finally learned the truth about your heritage. Your father, Patrick Brennan, was the finest man I ever knew, brave, kind, and completely devoted to his family. He died trying to save 3 miners trapped in a cabin, giving his life so that other children wouldn't lose their fathers. The mining company awarded his widow a substantial settlement, which I invested carefully over the years. I also inherited Patrick's shares in the Brennan mining concern, which his brother continues to operate in Montana. You are the sole heir to everything, my darling girl. I remarried Richard Sullivan when you were 5 because I thought you needed a father figure, and because I was lonely. I was wrong on both counts. Richard proved to be a weak man with expensive vices, and you were stronger on your own than you ever were under his influence. I pray that by the time you read this, you have found your own way in the world. Use this inheritance wisely, but remember that money cannot buy happiness, only security. True wealth comes from love, family, and the knowledge that you are living your life on your own terms. I love you always, Mother. Emmy finished reading through tears, her hands shaking so badly that Cole had to take the letter from her before she dropped it. $73,000, Cole said quietly, plus whatever the mining shares are worth. I can't process this. Emmy sat heavily in the chair the bank clerk had provided. Everything I thought I knew about myself, about my family, it was all lies. Cole knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. Not lies. Just ... incomplete truths. Your mother was trying to protect you. From what? From Richard Sullivan. If he'd known about this money when you were a child, what do you think he would have done? Emmy considered this, remembering her stepfather's gambling habits. His drinking, his casual cruelty when money was tight. He would have found a way to steal it. Exactly. Your mother kept you safe, the only way she knew how. The bank manager, Fitzgerald, cleared his throat diplomatically. Mrs. Hartley, there are some legal procedures we'll need to complete to transfer these funds, but everything appears to be in order. Will you be taking the full amount with you today? Emmy looked at Cole, suddenly overwhelmed by the magnitude of the decision. What do you think? I think we take enough to pay off the ranch debt and leave the rest here, earning interest, until we decide what to do with it. Cole's smile was gentle but firm. We're married, Emmy. Your decisions are our decisions now. They left the bank 3 hours later with a certified bank draft for $20,000, more than enough to save the ranch and provide security for their family. The remaining funds would stay in Denver, safely invested in growing a foundation for Hope's future. That evening, in their hotel room, Emmy sat on the bed holding Hope, while Cole reviewed the mining company documents they'd also found in the safety deposit box. According to these papers, you own a 30% stake in a profitable silver mine in Montana, Cole said. The quarterly dividend payments alone would be enough to live comfortably on. It doesn't feel real, Emmy said softly. This morning, I was a poor rancher's wife with a few dollars in sewing money. Tonight I single quotes what am I? You're the same person you were this morning, just with more options. Emmy looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her arms. I keep thinking about what my mother wrote, about money not buying happiness. Do you think she was right? I think she was wise. Money can solve problems, our debt, the ranch's future, Hope's education. But it can't make us love each other more than we already do. Cole moved to sit beside her on the bed, careful not to disturb Hope. Are you having second thoughts? About us? About the ranch? No, Emmy said firmly. If anything, this makes me more certain. I could go anywhere now, do anything, but I choose to go home with you. I choose our life together, even though it means giving up the possibility of a life of luxury. You could live like a queen with this kind of money, Emmy smiled, leaning against Cole's shoulder. I'd rather live like a rancher's wife. Queens are lonely, isolated creatures. I'd rather be part of something real. That night, as they lay in the unfamiliar hotel bed with Hope sleeping peacefully in her traveling basket between them, Emmy thought about identity and inheritance, about the difference between who you're born to be and who you choose to become. Money would change their circumstances, but it wouldn't change their hearts. They would return to the ranch, pay off the debts, and continue building the life they'd chosen together. Hope would grow up secure and loved, with opportunities Emmy had never dreamed of, but she would also grow up knowing the value of hard work and the importance of family. Cole, Emmy whispered in the darkness. Yes, when we get home, I want to finish that quilt for Hope. I want to add a piece of fabric from the dress I wore to the bank today, something to remind her that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones that bring you home. Cole's arm tightened around her. I think that's perfect. 3 days later, they began the journey back to Dustwell Junction. Their wagon lighter by one small strong box but heavier with the weight of possibility. As they crested the hill that gave them their first view of the ranch in the distance, Emmy felt her heart swell with something she'd never experienced before. The pure joy of coming home. The house looked exactly the same, but everything was different now. They were different, no longer bound together by necessity or protection, but by choice and love and the shared commitment to build something lasting together. Miguel came running from the barn when he saw them approaching, his face split by an enormous grin. Patron, Señora Emmy, how did it go? It went very well, Cole said, climbing down from the wagon and helping Emmy and Hope down. We have good news to share. That evening, as Emmy unpacked their things and settled Hope back into her familiar nursery, she found the quilt she'd been working on before they left. The wedding ring pattern was nearly complete now, each ring interlocking with the others, in an endless chain of connection and continuity. She picked up the square of silk she'd cut from Sarah's wedding dress, now joined by a small piece of the blue dress she'd worn to the bank in Denver. Different fabrics, different stories, but all part of the same beautiful whole. Tomorrow, they would ride into town and pay off their debts. Tomorrow, they would secure their future and celebrate their good fortune. But tonight, Emmy Rose Hartley was exactly where she belonged, home with her family, stitching together the pieces of a life that was richer than any bank account could ever make it. They were 3 days back from Denver when Richard Sullivan arrived at the ranch with papers that would change everything Emmy thought she knew about her inheritance. Emmy was in the garden with Hope, showing her daughter the late autumn flowers while the baby gurgled contentedly in her basket. When the sound of an approaching wagon made her look up, the man driving looked older than she remembered, grayer, thinner, with the haunted look of someone who'd been running from something for a long time. But the cruel set of his mouth was exactly the same that her stepfather had found them. Emmy rose. Richard Sullivan called out as he climbed down from his weather-beaten wagon. "You're looking well. Motherhood agrees with you." Emmy stood slowly, placing herself between Sullivan and Hope's basket. "What do you want, Richard? Is that any way to greet your loving stepfather? Especially when I've come all this way to bring you good news about your inheritance." Cole emerged from the barn at the sound of unfamiliar voices, Miguel close behind him. Emmy saw Cole's hand move instinctively to his gun when he recognized Sullivan, but he approached with measured calm. "Mr. Sullivan," Cole said, his voice cold, "you're not welcome here." "Now, that's where you're wrong, Mr. Hartley." Sullivan reached into his coat and withdrew a leather portfolio. "I'm here on legal business. Turns out there's been a terrible mistake about my dear stepdaughter's inheritance." Emmy felt ice form in her stomach. "What kind of mistake?" Sullivan's smile was predatory. "The kind that happens when banks don't do their due diligence about competing claims. You see, when your mother married me, she signed papers transferring all her assets to my control. As her surviving husband, I have legal claim to everything, including that money you took from the Denver bank." "That's impossible," Cole said flatly. "Emmy's mother died years ago. Any such arrangement would have expired, would it?" Sullivan pulled out a document with official seals and signatures. "According to territorial law, a husband's claim to his deceased wife's assets remains valid until formally revoked or until he remarries. Since I never remarried, and since I never formally revoked my claim." Emmy snatched the document from his hands, her eyes scanning the legal language with growing horror. It looked authentic. The signatures, the seals, the formal language all appeared legitimate. "This can't be real," she whispered. "Oh, it's real, my dear. Cost me a pretty penny to have my lawyer track down all the proper documentation, but it's all perfectly legal." Sullivan's expression hardened. "You see, when you ran off instead of fulfilling your obligations to Sheriff Briggs, you cost me a great deal of money. I had to find another way to pay my debts." "Your debts aren't Emmy's responsibility," Cole said, his hand now resting openly on his gun butt. "Actually, they are. According to this document, Emmy has been stealing from me for years. Every penny of that inheritance money belongs to me, and I want it back." Emmy looked at the papers again, her mind racing. Something about the documentation felt wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on what. "Even if this were legitimate," Cole said carefully, "Emmy used that money to pay off legal debts. It's gone." Sullivan's laugh was harsh. "Then, I suppose you'll have to find another way to pay me back. I'm thinking that ranch of yours would make suitable compensation over my dead body." "That can be arranged too." The threat hung in the air between them, deadly serious. Emmy saw Miguel's hand move to his own weapon, and she realized how quickly this confrontation could turn violent. "Wait," she said, stepping between the two men. "Richard, you say you have legal documents? I want them examined by a lawyer before I agree to anything." "Of course you do. That's why I brought Judge Morrison with me." A second wagon was approaching from the direction of town, and Emmy's heart sank as she recognized the man driving it. Judge Morrison was known throughout the territory as a corrupt official who'd sell his verdicts to the highest bidder. "Morrison's not a real judge," Cole said grimly. "He was stripped of his authority 2 years ago for taking bribes. Perhaps, but he's still a licensed attorney, and he's willing to verify the authenticity of my documents." Sullivan's smile grew wider. "For a reasonable fee, of course." Morrison climbed down from his wagon with the careful movements of a man who'd been drinking heavily. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, but he carried himself with the pompous authority of someone determined to maintain his dignity despite his circumstances. "Mrs. Hartley," Morrison said with exaggerated courtesy, "I've reviewed your stepfather's documentation, and I'm afraid his claim appears to be valid under territorial law." "Let me see those papers," Cole demanded. Morrison handed over a thick folder of documents: marriage certificates, property transfers, legal affidavits. To Emmy's untrained eye, they looked official and binding. but Cole studied them with the careful attention of someone who'd dealt with legal documents before. "These signatures don't match," he said finally, pointing to discrepancies in the handwriting. "And this seal is wrong. The territorial government changed their official seal 3 years ago." Sullivan's face darkened. "Are you calling me a forger?" "I'm calling you a liar and a cheat who's trying to steal money that doesn't belong to him." "Prove it." Cole looked at the documents again, then at Emmy's frightened face, and made a decision that would change everything. "Fine, we'll take this to a real court with a real judge. Judge Harrison can review these documents and determine their authenticity." "That could take weeks," Sullivan said. "I'm not a patient man." "Then you should have thought of that before. You forged legal documents." Sullivan's veneer of civility finally cracked completely. "You think you're so clever, don't you, Hartley? You think you can just steal another man's property and hide behind your money and your reputation." "I think I can protect my family from criminals." "Your family?" Sullivan laughed bitterly. "That girl isn't your family. She's property, same as her mother was. Property I invested years in, and I intend to see a return on that investment." The words hit Emmy like physical blows. After everything she'd been through, after all the healing and growth, her stepfather still saw her as nothing more than an asset to be exploited. "Get off my land," Cole said quietly, his voice deadly calm. "Not without what's mine. The only thing that's yours is a shallow grave if you don't leave in the next 5 minutes." Morrison, sensing the violence building in the air, began backing toward his wagon. "Perhaps we should discuss this in a more civilized setting." "There's nothing to discuss," Emmy said, finding her voice at last. "These documents are forgeries, and even if they weren't, I'm not the helpless girl you sold to Frank Briggs. I'm Mrs. Cole Hartley now, and I have rights you can't take away." Sullivan's face twisted with rage. "Rights? You ungrateful little—" He never finished the sentence. Cole's fist connected with his jaw in a blow that sent Sullivan sprawling in the dirt. The older man struggled to his feet, wiping blood from his split lip. "This isn't over," Sullivan snarled. "I have friends in this territory, people who understand that a man's property rights are sacred. You can't hide behind fake marriages and legal technicalities forever." "Watch me," Cole replied. After Sullivan and Morrison left, Emmy sat on the porch steps holding Hope, trying to stop her hands from shaking. Cole sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders, while Miguel stood guard nearby. "Are you all right?" Cole asked softly. "I don't know." Seeing him again, hearing him talk about me like I was still, Emmy's voice broke. "I thought I was past all that." "You are past it. You're not that scared girl anymore." "But what if he's right? What if those documents are real and I don't have any legal claim to the money?" Cole was quiet for a moment, considering their options. "Then we'll fight it in court. And if we lose the money, we'll find another way to save the ranch. How? I don't know yet, but I know we'll figure it out together." That evening, as they put Hope to bed and tried to process the day's events, Emmy found herself drawn to the trunk where she kept her mother's belongings. There had to be something, some document or letter that could prove Sullivan's papers were forgeries. She was going through her mother's Bible, looking for any hidden papers, when she found something that made her gasp. Tucked between the pages of Psalms was a small piece of paper with her mother's handwriting. "Marriage to R. Sullivan annulled by Territorial Court. October 15, 1871. Certificate filed with County Clerk, Cole." Emmy called out, her voice shaking with excitement. "Come here." Cole rushed into the room, fearing another crisis, but Emmy was smiling through her tears. "Look at this," she said, showing him the note. "My mother had their marriage annulled. If Sullivan was never legally her husband, then he has no claim to anything." Cole studied the note, hope beginning to build in his chest. "Do you think the annulment records still exist?" "There's only one way to find out." The next morning, they rode into town together, Hope secured in her traveling basket. The county clerk's office was housed in a dusty building behind the courthouse, presided over by an elderly man named Josiah Crane, who'd held the position for 30 years. "Mrs. Hartley," Crane said, adjusting his spectacles as he reviewed their request. "You're looking for annulment records from 1871. "Yes, sir." "Between my mother, Catherine Rose, and Richard Sullivan." Crane disappeared into the back room, emerging 20 minutes later with a leather-bound ledger and a triumphant expression. "Found it," he said, pointing to an entry in faded ink. "October 15, 1871. Marriage between Catherine Rose and Richard Sullivan annulled by order of Judge Harrison, the current judge's father, on grounds of fraud and misrepresentation. Emmy felt a wave of relief, so strong it made her dizzy. Fraud. According to the record, Mr. Sullivan was already married when he wed your mother. Bigamy, which made their marriage invalid from the start. Cole leaned over at the ledger, reading the details. This means Sullivan never had any legal claim to Emmy's mother's assets. That's correct. Mrs. Rose remained a widow in the eyes of the law, and her inheritance would pass to her daughter according to her will. Emmy thought about her mother, alone and frightened, discovering that the man she'd married to provide Emmy with a father figure was a fraud and a bigamist. How brave she must have been to take legal action. How careful to protect Emmy's future even while dealing with her own betrayal. Mr. Crane, Emmy said, could you prepare certified copies of these records? I have a feeling we're going to need them. That afternoon, armed with legal proof of Sullivan's lack of standing, they rode out to Judge Harrison's house to file a formal complaint against Sullivan for fraud and attempted extortion. Judge Harrison, a stern man with kind eyes, reviewed their evidence with professional thoroughness. These appear to be clear-cut cases of document forgery and attempted fraud, he said finally. I'll issue warrants for both Sullivan and Morrison. If they're still in the territory, Sheriff Davis will arrest them. And our inheritance, Emmy asked, remains legally yours, Mrs. Hartley. Mr. Sullivan's claims are completely without merit. As they rode home that evening, Emmy felt a profound sense of closure. The last threads connecting her to her old life had been cut, the final lies exposed and defeated. She was truly free now, not just from physical bondage, but from the psychological chains her stepfather had forged around her identity. It's over, she said wonderingly as they pulled into their own yard. It's really over. Cole helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist. How does it feel? Emmy looked around at the ranch and at the house where Hope was sleeping safely in her crib. She thought about the quilt she was still working on, about the life they were building together, piece by careful piece. It feels like coming home, she said, finally and completely. That night, as they sat together in the parlor reviewing their financial situation, Emmy made a decision that surprised even herself. I want to give some of the money away, she said. Cole looked up from the ledgers. Give it away. To people who need it. Doc Mitchell, for the loan he offered us. Mrs. Patterson, to expand her store. The church, for their fund, to help widows and orphans. Emmy's voice grew stronger as the idea took shape. My mother said true wealth comes from love and family. Maybe part of love is sharing what you have with the people who matter to you. Cole studied her face, seeing the woman she'd become, not just a survivor, but someone who'd learned to thrive, to think beyond herself and her own needs. You're remarkable, he said quietly. Do you know that? Emmy smiled, the kind of smile that started in her heart and worked its way outward. I'm learning to be you make me want to be remarkable. As they prepared for bed that night, Cole paused outside Emmy's door, just as he had weeks ago in Denver. Emmy. She turned, and in her eyes he saw not the frightened girl he'd rescued from an auction block, but the confident woman she'd become. Ask me again, she said softly. Will you move into my room? As my wife, in every way that matters? Emmy stepped closer, close enough to see the love and hope in his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. Yes, she whispered. I'd like that very much. And as they came together at last, not as protector and protected, not as benefactor and grateful recipient, but as two people who'd chosen to love each other despite all the reasons they might have stayed apart, the house around them seemed to sigh with contentment. Somewhere in her crib, Hope slept peacefully, surrounded by the love that had saved them all. And in the parlor, Sarah's music box sat silent but somehow approving, as if the first Mrs. Hartley was finally at peace, knowing that her husband had found his way back to happiness. Cole and Emmy had been husband and wife in truth for barely a week when the storm that would test everything they'd built together began gathering on the horizon. It started with small things: cattle found with suspicious injuries, fence lines cut in the night, water troughs mysteriously poisoned. Miguel reported strange riders seen at the edges of the property, always just far enough away to avoid identification but close enough to send a message. Someone was watching, someone was planning. It's Sullivan, Cole said grimly, as he and Miguel surveyed the latest damaged 50 feet of prime grazing fence destroyed in the night. He's trying to force us into a confrontation. Or maybe it's steel, Miguel suggested. Man like that doesn't give up easy when he wants something. Could be both of them, Cole replied, studying the deliberate nature of the destruction. Sullivan wants revenge, and Steele wants the land. They make natural allies. But it was Sheriff Frank Briggs who finally showed their hand. Emmy was alone in the house with Hope when he arrived. Cole and Miguel having ridden out to check the water pumps after reports of more sabotage, she saw him through the kitchen window still wearing his badge despite everything that had happened, still carrying himself with the arrogant swagger of a man who believed power made him untouchable. Emmy's first instinct was to hide, to grab Hope and barricade herself in the bedroom until Cole returned. But as she watched Briggs dismount and approach the house with deliberate confidence, something hardened inside her chest. She was done running, done hiding, done being afraid of men who thought they could control her through fear. She met him, on the porch, Hope cradled in her arms, Cole's father's rifle, the family heirloom that had become her anchor to the past, and her hope for the future within easy reach behind the door. "Sheriff Briggs," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "What brings you to my home?" Briggs smiled, the expression cold and predatory. "Your home. That's funny, Emmy. Last I checked, this was still Cole Hartley's ranch, and you were still my property. I'm Mrs. Hartley now, legally married and under my husband's protection. Marriages can be annulled, especially when they're based on fraud." Briggs climbed the porch steps slowly, like a cat stalking a cornered mouse. "See, I've been talking to your stepfather. Turns out there are questions about whether you had the legal right to marry Hartley in the first place." Emmy felt ice form in her veins. "What are you talking about?" "Well, if you were still technically my property when you married Hartley, and Sullivan's got documents that say you were, then that marriage isn't worth the paper it's written on." The lie was so audacious, so completely fabricated, that for a moment Emmy could only stare at him in disbelief. "That's not how marriage laws work, and you know it." "Maybe not. But it might take a court months to sort it all out. And in the meantime," Briggs took another step closer, and Emmy could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the cruel anticipation in his eyes. "In the meantime, you and that baby come back where you belong. Never. You don't get a choice in this, Emmy. You never did." Briggs lunged forward, reaching for Hope, and something primal and fierce exploded in Emmy's chest. She twisted away from his grasping hands, shielding her daughter with her body, while her free hand found the rifle behind the door. "Don't touch her," Emmy said, the weapon now leveled at Briggs' chest. "Don't you dare touch my daughter." Briggs laughed, but Emmy could see the wariness in his eyes. "You going to shoot me, Emmy? Sweet little thing like you. If I have to." "You won't. You're not a killer." Emmy thought about all the times she'd been afraid, all the times she'd submitted to avoid worse punishment, all the years she'd spent believing she was powerless. Then she looked down at Hope, innocent, trusting, depending on her mother for protection, and felt steel flow through her veins. "You're right," she said quietly. "I'm not a killer, but I'm a mother, and there's nothing I won't do to protect my child." The conviction in her voice must have reached something in Briggs' alcohol-fogged brain, because he took a step back, but his retreat was tactical, not permanent. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Sullivan and Steele have plans for this place, and those plans don't include you and Hartley playing house. You can fight all you want, but in the end, you'll come back to me, women like you always do." After Briggs left, Emmy sat on the porch steps holding Hope, the rifle across her knees, waiting for Cole to return. Her hands were shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. But underneath the fear was something new, a fierce, protective strength she'd never known she possessed. When Cole and Miguel rode into the yard an hour later, they found her there, and Cole's face went white when he saw the rifle. "What happened?" Emmy told him everything, watching as his expression grew darker with each detail. By the time she finished, Cole's hands were clenched into fists, and Miguel was checking his own weapons with grim efficiency. "He threatened Hope," Cole said, his voice deadly quiet. "He threatened all of us. He's working with Sullivan and Steele now. They're planning something big." Cole knelt beside Emmy, his hands gentle as he took the rifle and set it aside. "Are you hurt? Did he touch you?" "No, but Cole." Emmy looked into his eyes, seeing the rage and fear and love warring there. "I can't keep running from this. From him. If we don't stop Briggs now, he'll never leave us alone." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying it's time to fight back." That evening, Cole sent Miguel into town with messages for Judge Harrison, Doc Mitchell, and Ben Crawford. If Briggs, Sullivan, and Steele were planning a coordinated attack on the ranch, Cole intended to be ready for them. Judge Harrison arrived first, his face grave as he reviewed the situation. I've issued warrants for Sullivan and Morrison, but Briggs is still wearing a badge. Technically, he has legal authority. Legal authority to kidnap my wife and child. Of course not. But he could claim he was investigating reports of fraud or misconduct. It would be his word against yours, at least initially. Doc Mitchell arrived as the sun was setting, his medical bag supplemented by a well-maintained Winchester rifle. Heard you might have trouble coming your way. Doc, you don't need to. Yes, I do. Doc's expression was firm. Emmy helped deliver 3 babies in town while you were in Denver. Wouldn't take payment for any of them. Said helping neighbors was what people did for each other. Well, now, it's my turn to help. Ben Crawford rode in after dark, leading 2 of his most trusted hands. The gruff foreman had never been one for speeches, but his presence spoke volumes about his loyalty to Cole and his acceptance of Emmy as part of the family. Heard Briggs was sniffing around, Ben said simply. Figured you might need some backup. As the men gathered around the kitchen table to plan their defense, Emmy found herself thinking about the quilt she'd been working on. All those disparate pieces coming together to create something stronger than any of them could be alone. What was happening now, she realized. The community that had watched Cole grieve for 3 years was rallying to protect the family he'd built with her. They'll come at dawn, Cole predicted, studying the hand-drawn map of the ranch that covered the table. Steele's not the type to fight in the dark when he doesn't have to, and Briggs is probably too drunk by evening to coordinate an assault. How many men do you think they'll bring? Judge Harrison asked. Steele's got money to hire guns, and Sullivan's desperate enough to promise anything to get what he wants. I'd guess 8 to 10 men, maybe more. Miguel pointed to the map. The house is defensible, but if they surround us, we could be trapped. That's why we're not staying in the house, Cole said. We're going to meet them halfway. Emmy listened to the tactical discussion with growing unease. These were good men, family men, most of them with no military experience. They were willing to risk their lives for her and hope, but against professional gunmen hired by Marcus Steele. There has to be another way, she said finally. The men looked at her, and Cole's expression softened. Emmy, you and Hope will be safe. We'll make sure of that. That's not what I meant. Emmy stood, moving to the window that looked out over the moonlit landscape. What if we don't fight them at all? What if we give them what they think they want? You mean, surrender? Ben's voice was incredulous. I mean, outthink them. Emmy turned back to the table, her mind working furiously. Steele wants the ranch. Sullivan wants revenge and money. Briggs wants me. What if we make them think they can have all of that and use their greed against them? Cole studied his wife's face, seeing the intelligence and determination that had drawn him to her from the beginning. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to make your enemies fight each other instead of you. Emmy's plan was audacious in its simplicity. They would let word slip that Cole was preparing to surrender the ranch to avoid bloodshed, that he was meeting with Steele's representatives at dawn to negotiate terms. But they would also let Sullivan know that Emmy was planning to escape during the confusion, taking her inheritance money with her. They'll all come, Emmy explained, her voice growing stronger as the plan took shape. Steele, to finalize the land deal. Sullivan, to stop me from escaping. Briggs, to claim me before I can get away. But they'll all want different things, and they don't trust each other. And while they're arguing about who gets what, we surround them, Cole finished, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. Exactly. Instead of defending the ranch, we use it as bait. Judge Harrison nodded slowly. It could work, but it's risky if they figure out what you're doing. Then we'll be in the same position we're in now, except we'll have chosen the ground for the fight. Doc Mitchell cleared his throat. There's one problem with your plan, Emmy. It requires you to be visible, to be the bait that draws Briggs in, that puts you in real danger. Emmy felt Cole's immediate tension, saw the protective instincts flaring in his eyes. Doc's right, he said. I won't use you as bait. Emmy moved to stand beside her husband, her hand finding his. I am not the helpless girl you bought at that auction anymore. I'm your partner, your equal. If this is going to work, we have to do it together. Cole looked down at their joined hands, then at Hope sleeping peacefully in her basket, then at the faces of the friends who'd come to stand with them. If we do this, if something goes wrong, then we'll face it together. All of us. That night, as they prepared for what might be their final battle, Emmy finished the last stitches on Hope's quilt. The wedding ring pattern was complete now, each ring linked to the others in an unbroken chain of connection. In the center, surrounded by all the other pieces, was the square of silk from Sarah's wedding dress, a reminder that love could transcend even death, that families could be built from the most unlikely materials. Cole found her in the nursery, adding the final binding to the quilt's edges. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "It's finished." Just in time, Emmy held up the completed quilt, and in the lamplight, the pattern seemed to glow with its own inner warmth. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Hope will have this. Something made with love, something that tells the story of how we all came together." Cole sat beside her, on the rocking chair, pulling her close. "Nothing's going to happen to us. We're going to win this, and then we're going to raise our daughter in peace. Promise me something," Emmy said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Anything. If something does happen to me tomorrow, promise me you'll tell Hope about her real father, about Patrick Brennan, and how he died saving other people. Promise me you'll tell her that courage runs in her blood." Cole's arms tightened around her. "I promise. But you're going to tell her yourself. We're both going to watch her grow up, Emmy. We're both going to be there for every moment." As dawn approached, they could hear riders in the distance, many riders, coming from multiple directions. The trap was set, the players were in position, and the final confrontation that would determine their family's future was about to begin. Emmy kissed Hope's sleeping forehead, then carefully placed the completed quilt over her daughter. "Sleep well, little one," she whispered. "When you wake up, everything will be different." Cole's hand found hers as they walked toward the door, toward whatever waited for them in the pale morning light. "Ready?" he asked. Emmy thought about the girl she'd been, scared, powerless, believing she had no choices. Then she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, loved, fighting for the future she'd chosen. "Ready?" she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The ranch bell, Cole's grandfather's bell that had called generations of workers home for meals and marked the rhythms of ranch life, rang out across the valley at first light, its bronze voice carrying clear and strong in the crisp morning air. It was the signal Emmy had suggested, the call that would bring their enemies running and their friends into position. As the last echo faded across the hills, Cole could see riders approaching from 3 different directions, just as Emmy had predicted. From the east came Marcus Steele with 4 hired guns, riding in a tight formation that spoke of military discipline. From the south, Richard Sullivan approached with 3 rough-looking men, who had the desperate air of gamblers and drifters, willing to do anything for money. And from the north, Sheriff Frank Briggs rode alone, his badge glinting in the morning sun, confident in his legal authority and his right to claim what he believed belonged to him. Cole stood on the front porch of his house, Emmy beside him with Hope in her arms, both of them visible and apparently vulnerable, but positioned around the ranch yard, hidden behind barns and corrals and water troughs, were Judge Harrison, Doc Mitchell, Ben Crawford, and Miguel along, with 3 of Ben's most trusted hands. Each man was armed and ready, waiting for Cole's signal. "Remember," Cole murmured to Emmy, "no matter what they say, no matter how it looks, stick to the plan." Emmy nodded, shifting Hope to a more secure position. The baby was awake but calm, as if sensing the tension in the air but trusting in her parents' protection. Marcus Steele reached the house first, dismounting with the confidence of a man who believed he'd already won. He was impeccably dressed, despite the early hour, his Eastern suit immaculate, his silver-topped walking stick more ornament than necessity. "Mr. Hartley," Steele said with false cordiality, "I trust you've had time to reconsider my offer." "I have," Cole replied, "and I've decided you're right. This ranch is too much for me to handle anymore." Emmy had to admire Cole's acting ability. He sounded defeated, resigned, like a man who'd finally accepted the inevitable. Steele's smile widened with satisfaction. "A wise decision. I have the papers with me. Hold on there, Steele." Richard Sullivan had arrived, his men fanning out behind him with hands resting on their weapons. "Nobody's signing anything until we settle accounts." Steele's expression hardened. "Mr. Sullivan, I wasn't aware you had any business here." "My business is with that girl." Sullivan pointed at Emmy with a shaking finger. "She stole money from me, and I want it back before you start carving up this ranch." "The inheritance money belongs to Mrs. Hartley legally," Cole said. "The courts have confirmed that." "Corrupt courts, bought and paid for," Sullivan spat. That money is mine by right, and I'll have it back. Sheriff Briggs chose that moment to make his entrance, riding up to the group with his gun already drawn. Nobody's taking anything anywhere, he announced. I'm here on official business. What kind of official business? Steele demanded. The kind that involves arresting a woman for fraud and returning stolen property to its rightful owner. Briggs' eyes never left Emmy's face. Mrs. Hartley, if that's even her real name, is wanted for questioning about financial irregularities. Cole felt Emmy tense beside him, but she held her position. This was the most dangerous part of their plan, the moment when Briggs would try to assert his authority and take Emmy away. On whose authority? Judge Harrison's voice rang out across the yard as he stepped into view, his own weapon drawn and ready. Briggs turned, surprise flickering across his features. Judge Harrison, what are you doing here? Protecting the law from corrupt officials who think badges make them above it. Harrison's voice was steel. I have warrants for your arrest, Briggs. Fraud, extortion, and conspiracy. You can't arrest a sitting sheriff. I can arrest a criminal wearing a stolen badge. You were stripped of your authority 2 days ago by territorial order. Didn't you get the telegram? The color drained from Briggs' face. Without his legal authority, he was just another gunman, and everyone in the yard knew it. This is ridiculous, Steele interjected, sensing his carefully laid plans beginning to unravel. I came here to conduct legitimate business, not get involved in some local law enforcement drama. Your business here is done, Cole said firmly. I've changed my mind about selling. You can't change your mind. We had an agreement. We had a conversation. Nothing was signed. Steele's facade of civility finally cracked. You think you can play games with me, Hartley? I've got men positioned all around this ranch. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Are we? Cole asked mildly. That was when Doc Mitchell, Ben Crawford, and Miguel stepped into view, their weapons trained on Steele's men. The hired guns found themselves caught in crossfire, their numerical advantage suddenly meaningless. Now wait, just a minute, Sullivan said, his voice rising with panic. This wasn't supposed to happen. Steele, you said you could handle this quietly. Shut up, you fool, Steele snapped. Don't tell me to shut up. This whole thing was your idea. Hiring those men to sabotage the ranch, bribing Morrison to forge those documents. I said shut up, but Sullivan was too frightened to stop talking, and bringing Briggs into it, promising him the girl if he'd help with the legal complications. The confession hung in the air like smoke, damning and irrefutable. Emmy felt a surge of vindication there. Plan had worked perfectly, turning the conspirators against each other just as she'd predicted. Briggs, desperate now that his authority was gone and his corruption exposed, made the mistake that would end everything. He spurred his horse toward Emmy, reaching for her with grasping hands. If I can't have you legally, I'll take you anyway, Hope's Cryshaw, frightened. The sound of an innocent child confronted by violence cut through the morning air like a blade. It was a sound that touched something primal in every person, something that transcended conflicts over money and land and pride. The baby's voice seemed to freeze everyone in place for a heartbeat, as if the entire world had paused to listen. In that moment of stillness, Emmy saw the choice before her. Clearly she could continue playing the victim, waiting for others to protect her, or she could stand up and fight for her family herself. She chose to fight. Emmy thrust Hope into Cole's protective arms and reached for the rifle that Miguel had positioned within her reach according to their plan. In one fluid motion, she brought the weapon to her shoulder and fired a warning shot that sent Briggs' horse rearing in panic. The next one won't be a warning, she said, her voice carrying across the yard with absolute conviction. Briggs fought to control his mount, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. You little, he never finished the curse. Cole's father's rifle spoke again, this time from Cole's hands, and Briggs tumbled from his saddle with a cry of pain, clutching his wounded shoulder. Anyone else want to threaten my family? Cole asked, conversationally, working the rifle's action smoothly. The fight went out of the remaining men all at once. Steele's hired guns, faced with determined opposition and no legal cover for their actions, began laying down their weapons. Sullivan's companions, realizing they'd been drawn into a conspiracy that could see them all hanged, started backing away with their hands raised. This isn't over, Steele said through gritted teeth as Judge Harrison moved to arrest him. I have lawyers, connections. You can't prove anything. Actually, we can, Emmy said, producing a small device from her apron pocket. This is a new invention called a phonograph cylinder. It's been recording everything you've said for the past 10 minutes. The lie was perfect in its audacity. No such portable recording device existed. But Steele didn't know that. His face went ashen as he realized his own words had condemned him. Impossible, he whispered. Thomas Edison is a friend of my late father's business partner, Emmy continued smoothly. He was very interested in helping us document any criminal activity we encountered. Judge Harrison stepped forward with handcuffs, his expression grimly satisfied. Marcus Steele, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted extortion. Richard Sullivan, you're under arrest for forgery and harassment. And Frank Briggs, when Doc gets done patching up that shoulder, you're under arrest for corruption and attempted kidnapping. As the prisoners were secured and their hired guns disarmed, Cole found himself standing in the middle of his ranch yard, his arm around his wife, his daughter safe in her mother's arms, surrounded by friends who'd risked everything to stand with them. Is it over? Emmy asked softly. It's over, Cole confirmed, though he kept the rifle ready until the last of their enemies had been led away. Doc Mitchell approached, his medical bag in hand. Better let me take a look at that shoulder wound, he said to Briggs. Can't have you bleeding to death before your trial. Why? Briggs gasped through his pain. Why help me, after what I tried to do? Doc's expression was stern but professional, because that's what decent people do. They help, even when it's not deserved. As the sun climbed higher and the immediate danger passed, the ranch began to settle back into its normal rhythms. Miguel and Ben went to check on the cattle. Judge Harrison departed with his prisoners, and Doc Mitchell finished treating Briggs' wound before turning him over to the deputy who'd arrived from town. Cole and Emmy stood on their porch, watching the last of the law enforcement wagons disappear. Down the road, Hope had fallen asleep in Emmy's arms, exhausted by the morning's excitement but safe and secure. We did it, Emmy said wonderingly. We actually did it. We did it together, Cole corrected. All of us. Emmy looked out over the ranch, now secure and free of threats, and thought about beginnings and endings, about the courage required to fight for the life you wanted, rather than accepting the life others tried to force on you. The ranch bell sat silent now, its bronze surface gleaming in the morning sun. It had called them to battle, and now it would call them home. Tomorrow, it would ring for happier occasions, calling the hens in for meals, celebrating births and marriages, marking the peaceful passage of days in a life built on love rather than fear. Come on, Cole said, holding the door open for his family. Let's go home. And as they crossed the threshold together, Emmy realized that for the first time in her life, she truly understood what that word meant. Hope's first cry had ended one battle, but her second cry would begin something even more important, a celebration that would unite the entire community in joy, rather than conflict. 3 months after the confrontation that had secured their future, Hope lay in her crib beneath the completed wedding ring quilt, her tiny fists waving in the air as she discovered her own voice. But this wasn't the frightened wail of a child confronted by violence. This was the robust, demanding cry of a healthy baby who knew she was loved and expected her needs to be met immediately. She's got strong lungs, Cole observed with paternal pride as Emmy lifted Hope from her crib. She gets that from her mother, Emmy replied, settling into the rocking chair to nurse her daughter. I've found my voice too, these past few months. It was true. The shy, frightened girl who'd stood trembling on an auction block had been replaced by a confident woman who spoke her mind at town meetings, organized charitable efforts for struggling families, and had become the unofficial mediator for disputes throughout the territory. Emmy Hartley had found not just her voice, but her purpose. The trials of their enemies had been swift and decisive. Marcus Steele faced federal charges for his fraudulent land schemes and had been sentenced to 10 years in territorial prison. Richard Sullivan, confronted with evidence of forgery and fraud, had pled guilty in exchange for a shorter sentence, 5 years, after which he would be banned from the territory permanently. Frank Briggs had lost not only his badge but his freedom, sentenced to 7 years for corruption and attempted kidnapping. Hard to believe it's really over, Cole said, moving to look out the window at the peaceful ranch yard where chickens pecked contentedly in the dirt, and Miguel's children played hide-and-seek among the barns. Not over, Emmy corrected gently, beginning. Everything that happened before was just preparation for this. Cole understood what she meant. Their marriage had begun as a necessity, evolved into affection. and had now deepened into something that felt as permanent and essential as the mountains that surrounded their valley. They'd been through fire together and emerged stronger, more united, more certain of their choice to build a life together. The knock at the door interrupted their quiet family moment. Cole opened it to find Judge Harrison standing on their porch, but this time his expression was jubilant rather than grim. "Cole, Emmy," the judge said, removing his hat with a flourish. "I come bearing excellent news." "What kind of news?" Emmy asked, still holding hope. "The territorial legislature has approved the conservation easement for your ranch, full funding, as promised, plus a bonus for your cooperation in exposing the Steele conspiracy." Judge Harrison's smile was enormous. "You're now the official caretakers of the Hartley Ranch Conservation Area, with a generous annual stipend from the territorial government." Emmy felt tears prick her eyes. The money wasn't why she was emotional. They'd already secured their financial future with her inheritance. It was the recognition, the validation that their fight had been worthwhile, that their land would be protected for generations to come. "There's more," Judge Harrison continued. "The territorial governor wants to appoint you, Emmy, to a new position, territorial advocate for women's rights. Apparently, your handling of the Steele situation has impressed some important people." Emmy looked at Cole in surprise. "Me? You?" Judge Harrison confirmed. "Someone who understands what it's like to be powerless, but who's proven they can fight back and win. The territory needs advocates like you." The offer was flattering, but Emmy's first thought was of hope, of Cole, of the life they were building together on their ranch. "I'd have to travel, wouldn't I? Spend time away from home." "Some travel, yes, but most of the work could be done from here. You'd be helping women across the territory who are facing situations like what you escaped from." Emmy looked down at Hope, then at Cole, seeing the pride and support in his eyes. "What do you think?" "I think you'd be remarkable at it," Cole said without hesitation, "and I think you'd never forgive yourself if you didn't try." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Rosa Reyes came riding into the yard, her face flushed with excitement, followed by Doc Mitchell and Mrs. Patterson from town. "Emmy," Rosa called out, dismounting quickly, "have you heard the wonderful news?" "What news?" Emmy asked, stepping onto the porch with Hope still in her arms. "About the preacher. Reverend Campbell is finally coming through next month, and he wants to perform a proper wedding ceremony for anyone who needs one." Rosa's eyes sparkled with mischief, including couples who might have gotten married in a hurry and want to do it right this time. Emmy felt her cheeks warm. She and Cole had been legally married for months now, but their first ceremony had been rushed, born of necessity rather than celebration. The idea of exchanging vows again, this time surrounded by their friends and community, filled her with unexpected joy. "What do you say, Mrs. Hartley?" Cole asked softly. "Want to marry me again?" "I thought you'd never ask," Emmy replied, her smile radiant. The planning began immediately. Rosa insisted on organizing the entire celebration, with help from Mrs. Patterson and the other ladies in town. Doc Mitchell volunteered to give Emmy away, since she had no family of her own to perform the honor. Judge Harrison offered to host the reception at his large house in town. "It'll be the social event of the season," Mrs. Patterson declared. "Everyone for 50 miles will want to attend." As their friends bustled around making plans, Cole and Emmy found themselves standing together in the center of the commotion, Hope sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms despite the excited chatter around her. "Are you sure about this?" Cole asked quietly. "All this fuss and celebration." Emmy looked around at the faces of their friends, people who'd stood with them during their darkest hour, who'd risked their own safety to help them fight for their future. Rosa, glowing with the joy of organizing a celebration. Doc Mitchell, already planning his speech as the man who would give her away. Mrs. Patterson, sketching designs for wedding decorations. "These people are our family now," Emmy said. "They deserve to celebrate with us." Cole nodded, understanding. Their first wedding had been about protection, about legal necessity. This one would be about love, about community, about the life they'd chosen to build together. "Besides," Emmy added with a mischievous smile, "I want to wear a proper wedding dress this time. Something new, made just for this occasion. Not Sarah's dress." Emmy's expression grew gentle. "Sarah's dress will stay exactly where it is, honoring her memory. But this celebration is about our future, our family. I want to start this new chapter wearing something that's entirely mine." That evening, as they put Hope to bed and settled into their own evening routine, Cole found Emmy at her sewing table, sketching designs for her wedding dress. "What are you thinking?" he asked, looking over her shoulder at the drawings. "Something simple but beautiful. White silk, if I can get it from Denver. Lace that I'll make myself, and. Emmy paused, her pencil hovering over the paper. "I want to incorporate a piece of Hope's quilt into the design somehow. Something to symbolize that she's part of this union too." Cole studied the sketches, impressed by Emmy's artistic vision. "You're going to make it yourself, with Rosa's help?" "Yes. Every stitch sewn with love, just like the quilt." "And you're sure about the territorial appointment?" "You don't have to decide right away." Emmy set down her pencil and turned to face him. "I've been thinking about that. About all the women out there who are living the life I used to live, powerless, believing they have no choices. If I can help even one of them find her way to freedom, then you have to do it. But not at the expense of our family. Hope needs her mother, and you need your wife." Cole pulled Emmy close, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his side. "We'll make it work. Whatever it takes, we'll figure it out together." As they prepared for bed that night, Emmy paused at Hope's crib, looking down at her sleeping daughter. The baby lay beneath the completed wedding ring quilt, surrounded by all the pieces of their story fabric, from Sarah's dress at the center, representing the love that had made Cole's heart ready for a new beginning. Pieces from Emmy's old clothes, symbolizing the journey from her past to her present, and new fabric, bright and hopeful, representing the future they were building together. "What are you thinking about?" Cole asked, coming to stand beside her. "About patterns," Emmy said softly. "About how all the random pieces of our lives came together to create something beautiful. Sarah's death, my captivity, your loneliness, my fear. None of those things seemed like they could lead anywhere good, but somehow they led us to each other." Cole's arm came around her waist, pulling her close. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been in town that day? If I hadn't seen you on that auction block?" Emmy considered the question seriously. "I think we would have found each other anyway. Maybe not the same way, maybe not as quickly, but somehow. Some things are just meant to be." "You really believe that?" "I believe that love finds a way, even when it seems impossible. Even when the whole world is working against it, love finds a way." Outside their window, the ranch lay peaceful under a canopy of stars. Cattle grazed contentedly in the moonlit pastures, watched over by the cowboys, who'd become family. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and somewhere an owl answered with its own haunting song. But inside the house, three people who'd found each other against all odds were preparing to celebrate not just their survival, but their triumph. They'd fought for their right to choose their own destiny, and they'd won. Now they would spend the rest of their lives building on that victory, creating a legacy of love and courage that would echo through generations. Hope stirred in her sleep, making the soft sounds that babies make when they're dreaming, and Emmy smiled. Whatever dreams her daughter was having, Emmy was certain they were good ones. In this house, surrounded by love and protection, only good dreams were possible. "Come to bed, Mrs. Hartley," Cole said softly. "Tomorrow we start planning our future." "Our future," Emmy repeated, liking the sound of the words. "I can't wait to see what it holds." As they settled into their bed, in their house, surrounded by their chosen family, Emmy thought about the girl she'd been, and the woman she'd become. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every moment of struggle. She'd found her voice, her strength, her purpose. She'd found love and family and a place to call home. And most importantly, she'd learned that sometimes the most beautiful things in life came not from perfection, but from the courage to take broken pieces and stitch them together with hope. 6 months later, Cole Hartley stood at the altar of the Dustwell Junction Church, watching his wife walk down the aisle toward him for the second time. But this Emmy bore little resemblance to the frightened girl he'd first married in a hasty ceremony of protection. This Emmy moved with confidence and grace, her white silk wedding dress flowing around her like liquid moonlight. She'd sewn it herself, every stitch perfect, every detail a testament to her skill and artistry. At the bodice, barely visible unless you knew to look for it, was a small piece of fabric from Hope's wedding ring quilt, a symbol that their daughter was woven into the very fabric of their union. Hope herself rode in the arms of Doc Mitchell, who was giving Emmy away with paternal pride. The baby wore a tiny dress made from the same silk as her mother's gown, and around her neck was a delicate silver locket, Cole's wedding gift to his daughter, containing a picture of the three of them together. but it was the ring Cole held that carried the most meaning. He'd forged it himself in Miguel's blacksmith shop, working the metal with his own hands until it was perfect. It was simple, unadorned, but strong, a circle of gold that represented the choice they'd made to love each other, not out of necessity or convenience, but because they'd found in each other the missing pieces of their souls. The church was packed to capacity. Everyone in Dustwell Junction had come to witness the celebration, along with friends from neighboring towns who'd heard the story of the rancher and the girl he'd saved. Rosa had decorated the sanctuary with wildflowers from the ranch, and Mrs. Patterson had organized a feast that would feed half the territory. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Campbell began, his voice carrying easily through the crowded church, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who have already proven that love can triumph over any obstacle." Emmy's eyes never left Cole's face as the preacher spoke. She could see the wonder there, the disbelief that this moment was real. Even now, after everything they'd been through together, Cole sometimes looked at her like she might disappear. If he blinked too hard, Cole and Emmy have asked to exchange their own vows, Reverend Campbell continued. "Cole, would you like to begin?" Cole cleared his throat, his hands steady despite the emotion in his voice. "Emmy, when I first saw you, I thought I was saving you. I didn't realize that you were going to save me right back. You took a house that was just a monument to grief and turned it into a home full of laughter and love. You took a man who'd forgotten how to dream and gave him a future worth fighting for." He slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, below the engagement ring he'd given her just last month, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the light streaming through the church windows. "I promised to love you, to protect you, to stand beside you through whatever challenges come our way. I promise to be the father hope deserves and the husband you've made me want to become. And I promise that every day for the rest of my life, I'll choose you all over again." Emmy's voice was steady as she spoke her own vows, though tears shimmered in her eyes. "Cole, you gave me more than just my freedom. You gave me myself. You saw strength in me when I felt only fear. You saw beauty when I felt only shame. You saw a future when I could only see the past." She slipped a matching gold band onto his finger, her hands sure and gentle. "I promise to be your partner in all things, your comfort in sorrow, your celebration in joy. I promise to help you build the legacy your family deserves, and to raise our children to know that love is the strongest force in the world. And I promise that no matter where my work for the territory takes me, you and Hope will always be my first priority, my greatest love, my home." "By the power vested in me by the territorial government," Reverend Campbell declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Cole, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was soft, tender, full of promise rather than passion. When they broke apart, the church erupted in cheers and applause that seemed to shake the very rafters as they walked back down the aisle together. Hope gurgling happily in Cole's arms, Emmy caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Judge Harrison was smiling broadly, but beside him sat an elegant woman in traveling clothes whom Emmy didn't recognize. "Mrs. Hartley," the woman said, approaching as they reached the church doors. "I'm Catherine Morrison from the Territorial Capta. I've been very eager to meet you." "Mrs. Morrison," Emmy replied, curious, "how can I help you?" "Actually, I believe I can help you. I represent a group of women throughout the territory who've heard about your work, your advocacy for women's rights, your efforts to establish safe houses for those escaping difficult situations. We'd like to offer you funding for a much larger project." Cole shifted Hope to one arm and put his other arm around Emmy's waist. "What kind of project?" "A school," Mrs. Morrison explained, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "A place where women can learn trades, gain education, develop the skills they need to be independent. We'd like to build it here, near your ranch, with you as the director." Emmy felt her breath catch. The opportunity was everything she'd dreamed of, a chance to help women on a scale she'd never imagined possible. But the traveling, the territorial appointment, would become unnecessary. You could do more good right here in your own community than traveling from town to town. What do you say? Emmy looked at Cole, seeing the pride and excitement in his eyes. "What do you think?" "I think it's perfect. I think it's exactly what this place needs." The reception that followed was a celebration that would be talked about for years. Tables groaned under the weight of food, musicians played until their fingers ached, and couples danced under strings of lanterns that turned a churchyard into something magical. Cole and Emmy's first dance was to a fiddle tune that Miguel played with particular sweetness, and as they swayed together under the stars, Emmy thought about journeys and destinations, about the difference between running away and moving toward something better. No regrets? Cole asked softly as they danced. Only one, Emmy replied. Cole's step faltered slightly. What's that? Emmy smiled, the expression radiant in the lantern light. I regret that it took us so long to get here. But then again, maybe we needed to go through everything we did to appreciate what we have now. Later, as the celebration wound down and guests began departing with promises to visit soon, Emmy found herself standing with hope in the same spot where she'd first stepped down from Cole's wagon all those months ago. The ranch spread out before them in the moonlight, peaceful and prosperous, home to not just cattle and horses but to dreams realized and love fulfilled. Tell me what you see, Cole said, coming to stand beside his wife and daughter. Emmy looked out over the land that had become theirs through struggle and sacrifice, trial and triumph. I see hope's future. I see the school we're going to build, and all the women who'll find their strength there. I see cattle grazing in pastures protected forever by the conservation easement. I see our family growing, maybe more children playing in that yard. More children. Emmy smiled mysteriously. It's possible, very possible, actually. Cole's eyes widened with understanding and joy. Emmy, are you saying? I'm saying that Hope might be getting a little brother or sister next spring? Cole swept Emmy into his arms, careful of Hope sleeping between them, and spun them both around until Emmy was breathless with laughter. When did you find out? Doc Mitchell confirmed it yesterday. I wanted to tell you at the wedding, make it part of our new beginning. As they walked toward their house, their homie thought about the quilt that had started this whole journey. The wedding ring pattern with its interlocking circles, each one connected to all the others in an endless chain of love and commitment. That's what they'd built here, she realized. Not just a marriage, but a community, a legacy, a future that would echo through generations. Inside the house, they tucked Hope into her crib beneath the completed quilt, then stood together in the doorway watching their daughter sleep. The baby's breathing was soft and even, and in the moonlight streaming through the window, she looked like a small angel dreaming of better worlds. Cole, Emmy said softly, do you remember what you asked me that first day? Whether a man haunted by his own ghosts could save someone else from theirs. I remember. I think we found the answer. We saved each other. And now we're going to save others too. Cole's arms came around her from behind, his hands resting gently on her still belly where their second child was growing. What do you think this one will be like? Strong, Emmy said without hesitation. Brave, ready to fight for what's right, just like their parents, and their sister, and their sister. Outside, the wind chimes that Sarah had hung years ago sang softly in the evening breeze, but tonight their songs seemed different, not mournful, but celebratory, as if the first Mrs. Hartley was finally completely at peace, knowing that her husband had found his way back to happiness. The ranch bell sat silent in the moonlight, but tomorrow it would ring, again calling the hands to work, marking the rhythm of days filled with purpose and love. And someday, when Hope was old enough to understand, Emmy would tell her daughter about the day that Belle had called their enemies to defeat and their friends to victory. She would tell her about courage and choice, about the difference between being saved and saving yourself. But tonight, as Cole and Emmy prepared for bed in the house they'd fought to keep, surrounded by the life they'd chosen to build, there was only peace. The kind of peace that comes not from the absence of struggle, but from the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Emmy thought about the girl she'd been scared, powerless, believing she had no choices. Then she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, confident, ready to help others find their own strength. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every moment of pain and struggle. She'd found her voice, her purpose, her place in the world. She'd found love that was freely given rather than demanded, protection that empowered rather than imprisoned, a future that was hers to shape rather than accept. And as she settled into Cole's arms for another night in the bed they now truly shared, Emmy Rose Hartley knew that the best stories weren't about perfect people finding perfect love. They were about broken people choosing to heal together, about courage growing from necessity, about love blooming in the most unlikely soil. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to grow and serve and love. The school would be built, more women would find their freedom. Hope would grow strong and brave and ready to change the world in her own way. But tonight, three people who had found each other against all odds were exactly where they belonged, home, together, dreaming of all the beautiful tomorrows yet to come.